Book 6, Chapter 49. At the Hall Farm. The first autumnal afternoon sunshine of 1801, more than 18 months after that parting of Adam and Arthur in the Hermitage, was on the yard at the Hall Farm, and the bulldog was in one of his most excited moments, for it was that hour of the day when the cows were being driven into the yard for their afternoon milking. No wonder the patient beasts ran confusedly into the wrong places, for the alarming din of the bulldog was mingled with more distant sounds, which the timid feminine creatures, with pardonable superstition, imagined also to have some relation to their own movements. With the tremendous crack of the waggoner's whip, the roar of his voice, and the booming thunder of the waggon as it left the rickyard empty of its golden load. The milking of the cows was a sight Mrs. Poyser loved, and at this hour on mild days she was usually standing at the house door with her knitting in her hands, in quiet contemplation, only heightened to a keener interest when the vicious yellow cow, who had once kicked over a pailful of precious milk, was about to undergo the preventive punishment of having her hinder legs strapped. Today, however, Mrs. Poyser gave but a divided attention to the arrival of the cows, for she was in eager discussion with Dinah, who was stitching Mr. Poyser's shirt collars, and had borne patiently to have her thread broken 3 times by Totty pulling at her arm with a sudden insistence that she should look at baby, that is, at a large wooden doll with no legs and a long skirt, whose bald head Totty, seated in her small chair at Dinah's side, was caressing and pressing to her fat cheek with much fervour. Totty is larger by more than 2 years' growth than when you first saw her, and she has on a black frock under her pinafore. Mrs. Poyser, too, has on a black gown, which seems to heighten the family likeness between her and Dinah. In other respects there is little outward change now discernible in our old friends, or in the pleasant house-place, bright with polished oak and pewter. "I never saw the like to you, Dinah," Mrs. Poyser was saying. "When you've once took anything into your head, there's no more moving you than the rooted tree. You may say what you like, but I don't believe that's religion, for what's the Sermon on the Mount about, as you're so fond of reading to the boys, but doing what other folks 'ud have you do? But if it was anything unreasonable they wanted you to do, like taking your cloak off and giving it to 'em, or letting 'em slap you i' the face, I dare say you'd be ready enough. It's only when one 'ud have you to do what's plain common sense and good for yourself as you're obstinate the other way." "Nay, dear aunt," said Dinah, smiling slightly as she went on with her work, "I'm sure your wish 'ud be a reason for me to do anything that I didn't feel it was wrong to do." "Wrong? You drive me past bearing. What is there wrong, I should like to know, is staying along with your own friends, as are the happier for having you with 'em, and are willing to provide for you, even if your work didn't more nor pay 'em for the bit of sparrow's victual ye eat and the bit of rag you put on. And who is it, I should like to know, as you're bound to help and comfort i' the world more nor your own flesh and blood, and me the only aunt you've got above ground, and am brought to the brink of the grave every winter as comes, and there's the child as sits beside you will break her little heart when you go, and the grandfather not been dead a 12-month, and your uncle will miss you so as never was, a-lighting his pipe and waiting on him, and now I can trust you with the butter, and have had all the trouble of teaching you, and there's all the sewing to be done, and I must have a strange gel out at Treddleston to do it, and all because you must go back to that bare heap of stones as the very crows fly over and won't stop at." "Dear Aunt Rachel," said Dinah, looking up in Mrs. Poyser's face, "it's your kindness makes you say I'm useful to you. You don't really want me now, for Nancy and Molly are clever at their work, and you're in good health now by the blessing of God, and my uncle is of a cheerful countenance again, and you have neighbours and friends, not a few. Some of them come to sit with my uncle almost daily. Indeed, you will not miss me, and at Snowfield there are brethren and sisters in great need, who have none of those comforts you have around you. I feel that I am called back to those amongst whom my lot was first cast. I feel drawn again towards the hills where I used to be blessed in carrying the word of life to the sinful and desolate." "You feel? Yes," said Mrs. Poyser, returning from a parenthetic glance at the cows. "That's allus the reason I'm to sit down wi' when you've a mind to do anything contrary. What do you want to be preaching for more than you're preaching now? Don't you go off, the Lord knows where, every Sunday, a-preaching and praying? And haven't you got Methodists enow at Treddleston to go and look at if church folks' faces are too handsome to please you? And isn't there them i' this parish as you've got under hand, and they're like enough to make friends with old Harry again as soon as your back's turned? There's that Bessie Cranage. She'll be flaunting in new finery 3 weeks after you're gone, I'll be bound. She'll no more go on in her new ways without you than a dog'll stand on its hind legs when there's nobody looking. But I suppose it doesn't matter so much about folks' souls i' this country, else you'd be for staying with your own aunt, for she's none so good but what you might help her to be better." There was a certain something in Mrs. Poyser's voice just then which she did not wish to be noticed, so she turned round hastily to look at the clock and said, "See there, it's tea time, and if Martin's i' the rickyard he'll like a cup. Here, Totty, my chicken, let mother put your bonnet on, and then you go out into the rickyard and see your father's there, and tell him he mustn't go away again without coming to have a cup of tea. And tell your brothers to come in too." Totty trotted off in her flapping bonnet, while Mrs. Poyser set out the bright oak table and reached down the teacups. "You talk of them gells, Nancy and Molly, being clever at their work," she began again. "It's fine talking. They're all the same, clever or stupid. One can't trust 'em out of one's sight a minute. They want somebody's eye on 'em constant if they're to be kept to their work. And suppose I'm ill again this winter, as I was the winter before last, who's to look after 'em then if you're gone? And there's that blessed child. Something's sure to happen to her. They'll let her tumble into the fire, or get at the kettle with a boiling lard in't, or some mischief as'll lame her for life. And it'll be all your fault, Dinah." "Aunt," said Dinah, "I promise to come back to you in the winter if you're ill. Don't think I will ever stay away from you if you're in real want of me. But indeed it is needful for my own soul that I should go away from this life of ease and luxury, in which I have all things too richly to enjoy. At least that I should go away for a short space. No one can know but myself what are my inward needs, and the besetments I am most in danger from. Your wish for me to stay is not a call of duty which I refuse to hearken to because it is against my own desires. It is a temptation that I must resist, lest the love of the creature should become like a mist in my soul, shutting out the heavenly light." "It passes my cunning to know what you mean by ease and luxury," said Mrs. Poyser as she cut the bread and butter. "It's true there's good victual enough about you, as nobody shall ever say I don't provide enough and to spare. But if there's ever a bit of odds and ends as nobody else would eat, you're sure to pick it out. But look there, there's Adam Bede carrying the little un in. I wonder how it is he's come so early." Mrs. Poyser hastened to the door for the pleasure of looking at her darling in a new position, with love in her eyes, but reproof on her tongue. "Oh, for shame, Totty! Little girls of 5-year-old should be ashamed to be carried. Why, Adam, she'll break your arm, such a big girl as that. Set her down, for shame." "Nay, nay," said Adam, "I can lift her with my hand. I've no need to take my arm to it." Totty, looking as serenely unconscious of remark as a fat white puppy, was set down at the door-place, and the mother enforced her reproof with a shower of kisses. "You're surprised to see me at this hour of the day," said Adam. "Yes, but come in," said Mrs. Poyser, making way for him. "There's no bad news, I hope?" "No, nothing bad," Adam answered, as he went up to Dinah and put out his hand to her. She had laid down her work and stood up instinctively as he approached her. A faint blush died away from her pale cheek as she put her hand in his and looked up at him timidly. "It's an errand to you brought me, Dinah," said Adam, apparently unconscious that he was holding her hand all the while. "Mother's a bit ailing, and she set her heart on your coming to stay the night with her, if you'd be so kind. I told her I'd call and ask you as I came from the village. She overworks herself, and I can't persuade her to have a little girl to help her. I don't know what's to be done." Adam released Dinah's hand as he ceased speaking, and was expecting an answer, but before she had opened her lips, Mrs. Poyser said, "Look there now, I told you there was folks enow to help i' this parish without going further off. There's Mrs. Bede getting as old and casualty as can be, and she won't let anybody but you go anigh her hardly. The folks at Snowfield have learnt by this time to do better without you nor she can." "I'll put my bonnet on and set off directly if you don't want anything done first, Aunt," said Dinah, folding up her work. "Yes, I do want something done. I want you to have your tea, child. It's all ready, and you'll have a cup, Adam, if you aren't in too big a hurry." "Yes, I'll have a cup, please, and then I'll walk with Dinah. I'm going straight home, for I've got a lot of timber valuations to write out." "Why, Adam, lad, are you here?" said Mr. Poyser, entering warm and coatless, with the 2 black-eyed boys behind him, still looking as much like him as 2 small elephants are like a large one. "How is it we've got sight of you so long before foddering time?" "I came on an errand for mother," said Adam. "She's got a touch of her old complaint, and she wants Dinah to go and stay with her a bit." "Well, we'll spare her for your mother a little while," said Mr. Poyser, "but we wunna spare her for anybody else, only her husband." "Husband?" said Marty, who was at the most prosaic and literal period of the boyish mind. "Why, Dinah hasn't got a husband." "Spare her?" said Mrs. Poyser, placing a seed-cake on the table, and then seating herself to pour out the tea. "But we must spare her, it seems, and not for a husband neither, but for her own megrims. Tommy, what are you doing with your little sister's doll? Making the child naughty when she'd be good if you'd let her. You shan't have a morsel of cake if you behave so." Tommy, with true brotherly sympathy, was amusing himself by turning Dolly's skirt over her bald head and exhibiting her truncated body to the general scorn, an indignity which cut Totty to the heart. "What do you think Dinah's been a-telling me since dinner-time?" Mrs. Poyser continued, looking at her husband. I'm a poor un at guessing," said Mr. Poyser. "Why, she means to go back to Snowfield again, and work i' the mill, and starve herself as she used to do, like a creature as has got no friends." Mr. Poyser did not readily find words to express his unpleasant astonishment. He only looked from his wife to Dinah, who had now seated herself beside Totty as a bulwark against brotherly playfulness, and was busying himself with the children's tea. If he had been given to making general reflections, it would have occurred to him that there was certainly a change come over Dinah, for she never used to change colour, but as it was, he merely observed that her face was flushed at that moment. Mr. Poyser thought she looked the prettier for it. It was a flush no deeper than the petal of a monthly rose. Perhaps it came because her uncle was looking at her so fixedly. But there is no knowing, for just then Adam was saying with quiet surprise, "Why, I hoped Dinah was settled among us for life. I thought she'd given up the notion of going back to her old country." "Thought, yes," said Mrs. Poyser, "and so would anybody else have thought, as had got their right end upwards. But I suppose you must be a Methodist to know what a Methodist'll do. It's ill guessing what the bats are flying after." "Why, what have we done to you, Dinah, as you must go away from us?" said Mr. Poyser, still pausing over his teacup. "It's like breaking your word, Welly, for your aunt never had no thought but you'd make this your home." "Nay, uncle," said Dinah, trying to be quite calm. "When I first came, I said it was only for a time, as long as I could be of any comfort to my aunt." "Well, and who said you'd ever left off being a comfort to me?" said Mrs. Poyser. "If you didn't mean to stay with me, you'd better never have come. Them as has never had a cushion don't miss it." "Nay, nay," said Mr. Poyser, who objected to exaggerated views. "They mustna say so. We should have been ill off without her. Lady Day was a 12-month. We mun be thankful for that, whether she stays or no. But I canna think what she mun leave a good home for, to go back into country where the land most on't isn't worth 10 shillings an acre, rent and profits. Why, that's just the reason she wants to go, as far as she can give a reason," said Mrs. Poyser. "She says this country's too comfortable, and there's too much to eat, and folks aren't miserable enough. And she's going next week. I canna turn her, say what I will. It's allays the way with them meek-faced people. You may as well pelt a bag of feathers as talk to 'em. But I say it isn't a religion to be so obstinate. Is it now, Adam?" Adam saw that Dinah was more disturbed than he had ever seen her by any matter relating to herself, and anxious to relieve her if possible, he said, looking at her affectionately, "Nay, I can't find fault with anything Dinah does. I believe her thoughts are better than our guesses, let 'em be what they may. I should have been thankful for her to stay among us, but if she thinks well to go, I wouldn't cross her, or make it hard to her by objecting. We owe her something different to that." As it often happens, the words intended to relieve her were just too much for Dinah's susceptible feelings at this moment. The tears came into the grey eyes too fast to be hidden, and she got up hurriedly, meaning it to be understood that she was going to put on her bonnet. "Mother, what's Dinah crying for?" said Totty. "She isn't a naughty dell." "Thee'st gone a bit too fur," said Mr. Poyser. "We've no right to interfere with her doing as she likes, and thee'dst be as angry as could be with me if I said a word against anything she did." "Because you'd be very like be finding fault without reason," said Mrs. Poyser. "But there's reason in what I say, else I shouldn't say it. It's easy talking for them as can't love her so well as her own aunt does. And me got so used to her. I shall feel as uneasy as a new-sheared sheep when she's gone from me, and to think of her leaving a parish where she's so looked on. There's Mr. Irwine makes as much of her as if she was a lady, for all her being a Methodist, and with that maggot a preaching in her head, God forgive me if I'm i' the wrong to call it so." "Aye," said Mr. Poyser, looking jocose. "But thee dostna tell Adam what he said to thee about it one day. The missus was saying, Adam, as the preaching was the only fault to be found with Dinah, and Mr. Irwine says, 'But you mustn't find fault with her for that, Mrs. Poyser. You forget she's got no husband to preach to.' I'll answer for it, you give Poyser many a good sermon." "The parson had thee there," Mr. Poyser added, laughing unctuously. "I told Bartle Massey on it, and he laughed too." "Yes, it's a small joke sets men laughing when they sit a-staring at one another with a pipe i' their mouths," said Mrs. Poyser. "Give Bartle Massey his way, and he'll have all the sharpness to himself. If the chaff-cutter had the making of us, we should all be straw, I reckon. Totty, my chicken, go upstairs to cousin Dinah and see what she's doing, and give her a pretty kiss." This errand was devised for Totty as a means of checking certain threatening symptoms about the corners of the mouth. For Tommy, no longer expectant of cake, was lifting up his eyelids with his forefingers and turning his eyeballs towards Totty in a way that she felt to be disagreeably personal. "You're rare and busy now, eh, Adam?" said Mr. Poyser. "Burge's getting so bad wi' his asthmy. It's well if he'll ever do much riding about again." "Yes, we've got a pretty bit of building on hand now," said Adam. "What with the repairs on the estate and the new houses at Treddleston." "I'll bet a penny that new house Burge is building on his own bit of land is for him and Mary to go to," said Mr. Poyser. "He'll be for laying by business soon, I'll warrant, and be wanting you to take it all and pay him so much by the year. We shall see you living on the hill before another 12 months over." "Well," said Adam, "I should like to have the business in my own hands. It isn't as I mind much about getting any more money. We've enough and to spare now, with only our 2 selves and mother. But I should like to have my own way about things. I could try plans then as I can't do now." "You get on pretty well with the new steward, I reckon," said Mr. Poyser. Yes, he's a sensible man enough. Understands farming. He's carrying on the draining and all that. Capital. You must go some day towards the Stonyshire side and see what alterations they're making. But he's got no notion about buildings. You can so seldom get hold of a man as can turn his brains to more than one thing. It's just as if they wore blinkers like the horses and could see nothing of one side of 'em. Now there's Mr. Irwine has got notions of building more than most architects. For, as for the architects, they set up to be fine fellows, but the most of 'em don't know where to set a chimney so as it shan't be quarrelling with the door. My notion is a practical builder that's got a bit of taste makes the best architect for common things, and I've 10 times the pleasure of seeing after the work when I've made the plan myself." Mr. Poyser listened with an admiring interest to Adam's discourse on building, but perhaps it suggested to him that the building of his corn-rick had been proceeding a little too long without the control of the master's eye, for when Adam had done speaking he got up and said, "Well, lad, I'll bid you good-bye now, for I'm off to the rick-yard again." Adam rose too, for he saw Dinah entering with her bonnet on and a little basket in her hand, preceded by Totty. "You're ready, I see, Dinah," Adam said, "so we'll set off, for the sooner I'm at home the better." "Mother," said Totty with her treble pipe, "Dinah was saying her prayers and crying ever so." "Hush, hush," said the mother, "little girls mustn't chatter." Whereupon the father, shaking with silent laughter, set Totty on the white deal table and desired her to kiss him. Mr. and Mrs. Poyser, you perceive, had no correct principles of education. "Come back tomorrow if Mrs. Bede doesn't want you, Dinah," said Mrs. Poyser. "But you can stay, you know, if she's ill." So, when the goodbyes had been said, Dinah and Adam left the Hall Farm together. Chapter 50. In the Cottage. Adam did not ask Dinah to take his arm when they got out into the lane. He had never yet done so, often as they had walked together, for he had observed that she never walked arm in arm with Seth, and he thought, perhaps, that kind of support was not agreeable to her. So they walked apart, though side by side, and the close poke of her little black bonnet hid her face from him. "You can't be happy, then, to make the Hall Farm your home, Dinah," Adam said, with the quiet interest of a brother who has no anxiety for himself in the matter. "It's a pity, seeing they're so fond of you." "You know, Adam, my heart is as their heart, so far as love for them and care for their welfare goes, but they are in no present need. Their sorrows are healed, and I feel that I am called back to my old work, in which I found a blessing that I have missed of late in the midst of too abundant worldly good. I know it is a vain thought to flee from the work that God appoints us for the sake of finding a greater blessing to our own souls, as if we could choose for ourselves where we shall find the fullness of the divine presence, instead of seeking it where alone it is to be found, in loving obedience. But now, I believe, I have a clear showing that my work lies elsewhere, at least for a time. In the years to come, if my aunt's health should fail, or she should otherwise need me, I shall return." "You know best, Dinah," said Adam. "I don't believe you'd go against the wishes of them that love you and are akin to you without a good and sufficient reason in your own conscience. I've no right to say anything about my being sorry. You know well enough what cause I have to put you above every other friend I've got. And if it had been ordered so that you could have been my sister and lived with us all our lives, I should have counted it the greatest blessing that could happen to us now. But Seth tells me there's no hope of that. Your feelings are different, and perhaps I'm taking too much upon me to speak about it." Dinah made no answer, and they walked on in silence for some yards, till they came to the stone stile where, as Adam had passed through first and turned round to give her his hand while she mounted the unusually high step, she could not prevent him from seeing her face. It struck him with surprise, for the grey eyes, usually so mild and grave, had the bright, uneasy glance which accompanies suppressed agitation, and the slight flush in her cheeks, with which she had come downstairs, was heightened to a deep rose colour. She looked as if she were only sister to Dinah. Adam was silent with surprise and conjecture for some moments, and then he said, "I hope I've not hurt or displeased you by what I've said, Dinah. Perhaps I was making too free. I've no wish different from what you see to be best, and I'm satisfied for you to live 30 mile off if you think it right. I shall think of you just as much as I do now, for you're bound up with what I can no more help remembering than I can help my heart beating." Poor Adam! Thus do men blunder. Dinah made no answer, but she presently said, "Have you heard any news from that poor young man since we last spoke of him?" Dinah always called Arthur so. She had never lost the image of him as she had seen him in the prison. "Yes," said Adam. "Mr. Irwine read me part of a letter from him yesterday. It's pretty certain, they say, that there'll be a peace soon, though nobody believes it'll last long. But he says he doesn't mean to come home. He's no heart for it yet, and it's better for others that he should keep away. Mr. Irwine thinks he's in the right not to come. It's a sorrowful letter. He asks about you and the Poysers, as he always does. There's one thing in the letter cut me a good deal. 'You can't think what an old fellow I feel,' he says. 'I make no schemes now. I'm the best when I've a good day's march or fighting before me.' He's of a rash, warm-hearted nature like Esau, for whom I have always felt great pity," said Dinah. "That meeting between the brothers, where Esau is so loving and generous, and Jacob so mild and distrustful, notwithstanding his sense of the divine favour, has always touched me greatly. Truly, I have been tempted sometimes to say that Jacob was of a mean spirit. But that is our trial. We must learn to see the good in the midst of much that is unlovely." "Ah," said Adam, "I like to read about Moses best in the Old Testament. He carried a hard business well through, and died when other folks were going to reap the fruits. A man must have courage to look at his life so, and think what'll come of it after he's dead and gone. A good, solid bit of work lasts. If it's only laying a floor down, somebody's the better for it being done well, besides the man as does it." They were both glad to talk of subjects that were not personal, and in this way they went on till they passed the bridge across the Willow Brook, when Adam turned round and said, "Ah, there's Seth. I thought he'd be home soon. Does he know of your going, Dinah?" "Yes, I told him last Sabbath." Adam remembered now that Seth had come home much depressed on Sunday evening, a circumstance which had been very unusual with him of late, for the happiness he had in seeing Dinah every week seemed long to have outweighed the pain of knowing she would never marry him. This evening he had his habitual air of dreamy, benignant contentment, until he came quite close to Dinah and saw the traces of tears on her delicate eyelids and eyelashes. He gave one rapid glance at his brother, but Adam was evidently quite outside the current of emotion that had shaken Dinah. He wore his everyday look of unexpectant calm. Seth tried not to let Dinah see that he had noticed her face, and only said, "I'm thankful you're come, Dinah, for Mother's been hungering after the sight of you all day. She began to talk of you the first thing in the morning." When they entered the cottage, Lisbeth was seated in her armchair, too tired with setting out the evening meal, a task she always performed a long time beforehand, to go and meet them at the door as usual, when she heard the approaching footsteps. "Come, child, thee't come at last," she said, when Dinah went towards her. "What dost mane by lavin' me a week and ne'er coming anigh me?" "Dear friend," said Dinah, taking her hand, "you're not well. If I'd known it sooner, I'd have come." "And how's thee to know if thee dostna come? The lads only know what I tell 'em. As long as you can stir hand and foot, the men think you hearty. But I'm none so bad, only a bit of a cold sets me aching. And the lads tease me so, to have somebody with me to do the work, they make me ache worse wi' talking. If they'd come and stay with me, they'd let me alone. The poisers canna want thee so bad as I do. But take thy bonnet off, and let me look at thee." Dinah was moving away, but Lisbeth held her fast while she was taking off her bonnet, and looked at her face as one looks into a newly gathered snowdrop to renew the old impressions of purity and gentleness. "What's the matter with thee?" said Lisbeth in astonishment. "Thee'st been a-crying." "It's only a grief that'll pass away," said Dinah, who did not wish just now to call forth Lisbeth's remonstrances by disclosing her intention to leave Hazelop. "You shall know about it shortly. We'll talk of it tonight. I shall stay with you tonight." Lisbeth was pacified by this prospect, and she had the whole evening to talk with Dinah alone. For there was a new room in the cottage, you remember, built nearly 2 years ago in the expectation of a new inmate. And here Adam always sat when he had writing to do or plans to make. Seth sat there too this evening, for he knew his mother would like to have Dinah all to herself. There were 2 pretty pictures on the 2 sides of the wall in the cottage. On one side there was the broad-shouldered, large-featured, hardy old woman in her blue jacket and buff kerchief, with her dim-eyed, anxious looks turned continually on the lily face and the slight form in the black dress that were either moving lightly about in helpful activity, or seated close by the old woman's armchair, holding her withered hand, with eyes lifted up towards her to speak a language which Lisbeth understood far better than the Bible or the hymn book. She would scarcely listen to reading at all tonight. "Nay, nay, shut the book," she said. "We mun talk. I want to know what thee was crying about. Hast got troubles of thy own like other folks?" On the other side of the wall there were the 2 brothers, so like each other in the midst of their unlikeness. Adam, with knit brows, shaggy hair, and dark, vigorous colour, absorbed in his figuring. Seth, with large, rugged features, the close copy of his brother's, but with thin, wavy brown hair and blue, dreamy eyes, as often as not looking vaguely out of the window instead of at his book, although it was a newly bought book, Wesley's abridgment of Madame Guion's life, which was full of wonder and interest for him. Seth had said to Adam, "Can I help thee with anything in here tonight? I don't want to make a noise in the shop." "No, lad," Adam answered, "there's nothing but what I must do myself. Thee'st got the new book to read." And often, when Seth was quite unconscious, Adam, as he paused after drawing a line with his ruler, looked at his brother with a kind smile dawning in his eyes. He knew the lad liked to sit full of thoughts he could give no account of. They'd never come to anything, but they made him happy. And in the last year or so, Adam had been getting more and more indulgent to Seth. It was part of that growing tenderness which came from the sorrow at work within him. For Adam, though you see him quite master of himself, working hard and delighting in his work after his inborn, inalienable nature, had not outlived his sorrow, had not felt it slip from him as a temporary burden and leave him the same man again. Do any of us? God forbid. It would be a poor result of all our anguish and our wrestling if we won nothing but our old selves at the end of it, if we could return to the same blind loves, the same self-confident blame, the same light thoughts of human suffering, the same frivolous gossip over blighted human lives, the same feeble sense of that unknown towards which we have sent forth irrepressible cries in our loneliness. Let us rather be thankful that our sorrow lives in us as an indestructible force, only changing its form as forces do, and passing from pain into sympathy, the one poor word which includes all our best insight and our best love. Not that this transformation of pain into sympathy had completely taken place in Adam yet. There was still a great remnant of pain, and this, he felt, would subsist as long as her pain was not a memory, but an existing thing, which he must think of as renewed with the light of every new morning. But we get accustomed to mental as well as bodily pain, without, for all that, losing our sensibility to it. It becomes a habit of our lives, and we cease to imagine a condition of perfect ease as possible for us. Desire is chastened into submission, and we are contented with our day when we have been able to bear our grief in silence and act as if we were not suffering. For it is at such periods that the sense of our lives having visible and invisible relations, beyond any of which either our present or prospective self is the centre, grows like a muscle that we are obliged to lean on and exert. That was Adam's state of mind in this second autumn of his sorrow. His work, as you know, had always been part of his religion, and from very early days he saw clearly that good carpentry was God's will, was that form of God's will that most immediately concerned him. But now there was no margin of dreams for him beyond this daylight reality, no holiday time in the working-day world, no moment in the distance when duty would take off her iron glove and breastplate and clasp him gently into rest. He conceived no picture of the future but one made up of hard-working days such as he lived through, with growing contentment and intensity of interest every fresh week. Love, he thought, could never be anything to him but a living memory, a limb lopped off, but not gone from consciousness. He did not know that the power of loving was all the while gaining new force within him, that the new sensibilities bought by a deep experience were so many new fibres by which it was possible, nay, necessary to him, that his nature should intertwine with another. Yet he was aware that common affection and friendship were more precious to him than they used to be, that he clung more to his mother and Seth, and had an unspeakable satisfaction in the sight or imagination of any small addition to their happiness. The Poysers, too. Hardly 3 or 4 days passed, but he felt the need of seeing them and interchanging words and looks of friendliness with them. He would have felt this, probably, even if Dinah had not been with them. But he had only said the simplest truth in telling Dinah that he put her above all other friends in the world. Could anything be more natural? For in the darkest moments of memory, the thought of her always came as the first ray of returning comfort. The early days of gloom at the Hall Farm had been gradually turned into soft moonlight by her presence. And in the cottage, too, for she had come at every spare moment to soothe and cheer poor Elizabeth. who had been stricken with a fear that subdued even her querulousness at the sight of her darling Adam's grief-worn face. He had become used to watching her light, quiet movements, her pretty, loving ways to the children when he went to the Hall Farm, to listen for her voice as for a recurrent music, to think everything she said and did was just right and could not have been better. In spite of his wisdom, he could not find fault with her for her overindulgence of the children, who had managed to convert Dinah the preacher, before whom a circle of rough men had often trembled a little, into a convenient household slave, though Dinah herself was rather ashamed of this weakness, and had some inward conflict as to her departure from the precepts of Solomon. Yes, there was one thing that might have been better. She might have loved Seth and consented to marry him. He felt a little vexed for his brother's sake, and he could not help thinking regretfully how Dinah, as Seth's wife, would have made their home as happy as it could be for them all. How she was the one being that would have soothed their mother's last days into peacefulness and rest. "It's wonderful she doesn't love the lad," Adam had said sometimes to himself, "for anybody'd think he was just cut out for her. But her heart's so taken up with other things. She's one of those women that feel no drawing towards having a husband and children of their own. She thinks she should be filled up with her own life then, and she's been used so to living in other folks' cares, she can't bear the thought of her heart being shut up from 'em. I see how it is well enough. She's cut out of different stuff from most women. I saw that long ago. She's never easy but when she's helping somebody, and marriage'd interfere with her ways, that's true. I've no right to be contriving and thinking it'd be better if she'd have Seth, as if I was wiser than she is, or than God either, for he made her what she is, and that's one of the greatest blessings I've ever had from his hands, and others besides me." This self-reproof had recurred strongly to Adam's mind when he gathered from Dinah's face that he had wounded her by referring to his wish that she had accepted Seth, and so he had endeavoured to put into the strongest words his confidence in her decision as right, his resignation even to her going away from them and ceasing to make part of their life otherwise than by living in their thoughts, if that separation were chosen by herself. He felt sure she knew quite well enough how much he cared to see her continually, to talk to her with the silent consciousness of a mutual great remembrance. It was not possible she should hear anything but self-renouncing affection and respect in his assurance that he was contented for her to go away. And yet there remained an uneasy feeling in his mind that he had not said quite the right thing, that somehow Dinah had not understood him. Dinah must have risen a little before the sun the next morning, for she was downstairs about 5 o'clock. So was Seth, for, through Lisbeth's obstinate refusal to have any woman help her in the house, he had learned to make himself, as Adam said, very handy in the housework, that he might save his mother from too great weariness. On which ground I hope you will not think him unmanly, any more than you can have thought the gallant Colonel Bath unmanly when he made the gruel for his invalid sister. Adam, who had sat up late at his writing, was still asleep, and was not likely, Seth said, to be down till breakfast time. Often as Dinah had visited Lisbeth during the last 18 months, she had never slept in the cottage since that night after Thias's death, when, you remember, Lisbeth praised her deft movements and even gave a modified approval to her porridge. But in that long interval Dinah had made great advances in household cleverness, and this morning, since Seth was there to help, she was bent on bringing everything to a pitch of cleanliness and order that would have satisfied her Aunt Poyser. The cottage was far from that standard at present, for Elizabeth's rheumatism had forced her to give up her old habits of dilettante scouring and polishing. When the kitchen was to her mind, Dinah went into the new room where Adam had been writing the night before to see what sweeping and dusting were needed there. She opened the window and let in the fresh morning air, and the smell of the sweet briar, and the bright, low slanting rays of the early sun, which made a glory about her pale face and pale auburn hair as she held the long brush, and swept, singing to herself in a very low tone, like a sweet summer murmur that you have to listen for very closely, one of Charles Wesley's hymns.
Eternal beam of light divine, fountain of unexhausted love, in whom the Father's glory shine, through earth beneath and heaven above. Jesus, the weary wanderer's rest, give me thy easy yoke to bear, with steadfast patience arm my breast, with spotless love and holy fear. Speak to my warring passions peace, say to my trembling heart, be still. Thy power my strength and fortress is, for all things serve thy sovereign will.
She laid by the brush and took up the duster, and if you had ever lived in Mrs. Poyser's household, you would know how the duster behaved in Dinah's hand, how it went into every small corner and on every ledge in and out of sight, how it went again and again round every bar of the chairs and every leg, and under and over everything that lay on the table, till it came to Adam's papers and rulers and the open desk near them. Dinah dusted up to the very edge of these and then hesitated, looking at them with a longing but timid eye. It was painful to see how much dust there was among them. As she was looking in this way, she heard Seth's step just outside the open door, towards which her back was turned, and said, raising her clear treble, "Seth, is your brother wrathful when his papers are stirred?" "Yes, very, when they are not put back in the right places," said a deep, strong voice, not Seth's. It was as if Dinah had put her hands unawares on a vibrating cord. She was shaken with an intense thrill, and for the instant felt nothing else. Then she knew her cheeks were glowing, and dared not look around, but stood still, distressed because she could not say good morning in a friendly way. Adam, finding that she did not look round so as to see the smile on his face, was afraid she had thought him serious about his wrathfulness, and went up to her so that she was obliged to look at him. "What, you think I'm a cross fellow at home, Dinah?" he said smilingly. "Nay," said Dinah, looking up with timid eyes, "not so. But you might be put about by finding things meddled with. Even the man Moses, the meekest of men, was wrathful sometimes." "Come, then," said Adam, looking at her affectionately, "I'll help you move the things and put 'em back again, and then they can't get wrong. You're getting to be your aunt's own niece, I see, for particularness." They began their little task together, but Dinah had not recovered herself sufficiently to think of any remark, and Adam looked at her uneasily. Dinah, he thought, had seemed to disapprove him somehow lately. She had not been so kind and open to him as she used to be. He wanted her to look at him, and be as pleased as he was himself with doing this bit of playful work. But Dinah did not look at him. It was easy for her to avoid looking at the tall man, and when at last there was no more dusting to be done, and no further excuse for him to linger near her, he could bear it no longer, and said, in rather a pleading tone, "Dinah, you're not displeased with me for anything, are you? I've not said or done anything to make you think ill of me." The question surprised her and relieved her by giving a new course to her feeling. She looked up at him now quite earnestly, almost with the tears coming, and said, "Oh, no, Adam, how could you think so?" "I couldn't bear you not to feel as much a friend to me as I do to you," said Adam. "And you don't know the value I set on the very thought of you, Dinah. That was what I meant yesterday when I said I'd be content for you to go if you thought right. I meant the thought of you was worth so much to me I should feel I ought to be thankful and not grumble if you see right to go away. You know I do mind parting with you, Dinah." "Yes, dear friend," said Dinah, trembling, but trying to speak calmly. "I know you have a brother's heart towards me, and we shall often be with one another in spirit, but at this season I am in heaviness through manifold temptations. You must not mark me. I feel called to leave my kindred for a while, but it is a trial. The flesh is weak." Adam saw that it pained her to be obliged to answer. "I hurt you by talking about it, Dinah," he said. "I'll say no more. Let's see if Seth's ready with breakfast now." That is a simple scene, reader. But it is almost certain that you too have been in love, perhaps even more than once, though you may not choose to say so to all your feminine friends. If so, you will no more think the slight words, the timid looks, the tremulous touches by which two human souls approach each other gradually, like two little quivering rain streams, before they mingled into one. You will no more think these things trivial than you will think the first detected signs of coming spring trivial, though they be but a faint, indescribable something in the air, and in the song of the birds, and the tiniest perceptible budding on the hedgerow branches. Those slight words and looks and touches are part of the soul's language, and the finest language, I believe, is chiefly made up of unimposing words, such as light, sound, stars, music. Words really not worth looking at or hearing in themselves any more than chips or sawdust. It is only that they happen to be the signs of something unspeakably great and beautiful. I am of opinion that love is a great and beautiful thing too, and if you agree with me, the smallest signs of it will not be chips and sawdust to you. They will rather be like those little words, light and music, stirring the long-winding fibres of your memory and enriching your present with your most precious past. Chapter 51. Sunday Morning. Lisbeth's touch of rheumatism could not be made to appear serious enough to detain Dinah another night from the Hall Farm, now she had made up her mind to leave her aunt so soon. And at evening the friends must part. For a long while, Dinah had said, for she had told Lisbeth of her resolve. "Then it'll be for all my life, and I shall ne'er see thee again," said Lisbeth. "Long while? I'n got no long while to live, and I shall be took bad and die, and thee canst ne'er come anigh me, and I shall die a-longing for thee." That had been the keynote of her wailing talk all day, for Adam was not in the house, and so she put no restraint on her complaining. She had tried poor Dinah by returning again and again to the question why she must go away, and refusing to accept reasons which seemed to her nothing but whim and contrariness, and still more by regretting that she couldna ha' one of the lads, and be her daughter. "Thee couldstna put up with Seth," she said. He isn't clever enough for thee, happen, but he'd have been very good to thee. He's as handy as can be at doing things for me when I'm bad, and he's as fond of the Bible and chapelin' as thee ought to sen. But happen thee'dst like a husband better as isna just to cut o' this hen. The running brook isna athirst for the rain. Adam 'ud ha' done for thee, I know he would, and he might come to like thee well enough if thee'd stop. But he's as stubborn as the iron bar, there's no bending him no way but on. But he'd be a fine husband for anybody, be they who they will, and so looked on and so clever as he is. And he'd be rare and loving. It does me good only a look of the lad's eye when he means kind towards me.
Dinah tried to escape from Lisbeth's closest looks and questions by finding little tasks of housework that kept her moving about. And as soon as Seth came home in the evening, she put on her bonnet to go. It touched Dinah keenly to say the last goodbye, and still more to look round on her way across the fields and see the old woman still standing at the door, gazing after her till she must have been the faintest speck in the dim, aged eyes. The God of love and peace be with them, Dinah prayed as she looked back from the last stile. Make them glad according to the days wherein thou hast afflicted them, and the years wherein they have seen evil. It is thy will that I should part from them. Let me have no will but thine. Lisbeth turned into the house at last, and sat down in the workshop near Seth, who was busying himself there with fitting some bits of turned wood he had brought from the village into a small work-box, which he meant to give to Dinah before she went away.
Thee'd see her again a Sunday afore she goes, were her first words. If thee wast good for anything, thee'dst make her come in again a Sunday night with thee, and see me once more.
Nay, mother, said Seth, Dinah'd be sure to come again if she saw right to come. I should have no need to persuade her. She only thinks it'd be troubling thee for naught, just to come in to say good-bye over again.
She'd ne'er go away, I know, if Adam 'ud be fond on her and marry her. But everything's so contrary, said Lisbeth with a burst of vexation.
Seth paused a moment and looked up with a slight blush at his mother's face. What, has she said anything of that sort to thee, mother? He said, in a lower tone.
Said? Nay, she'll say nothing. It's only the men as have to wait till folks say things afore they find 'em out.
Well, but what makes thee think so, mother? What's put it into thy head?
It's no matter what's put it into my head. My head's none so hollow as it must get in, and naught to put it there. I know she's fond on him, as I know the wind's coming in at the door, and that's enough. And he might be willing to marry her if he knowed she's fond on him, but he ne'er think on't if somebody doesna put it into his head.
His mother's suggestion about Dinah's feeling towards Adam was not quite a new thought to Seth, but her last words alarmed him lest she should herself undertake to open Adam's eyes. He was not sure about Dinah's feeling, and he thought he was sure about Adam's. Nay, mother, nay, he said earnestly, thee mustna think o' speaking o' such things to Adam. Thee's no right to say what Dinah's feelings are if she hasna told thee, and it'd do nothing but mischief to say such things to Adam. He feels very grateful and affectionate toward Dinah, but he's no thoughts towards her that'd incline him to make her his wife. And I don't believe Dinah'd marry him either. I don't think she'll marry at all.
Eh, said Lisbeth impatiently. Thee thinks so, 'cause she wouldna ha' thee. She'll ne'er marry thee. Thee mightst as well like her to ha' thy brother." Seth was hurt. "Mother," he said in a remonstrating tone, "don't think that of me. I should be as thankful to have her for a sister as thee wouldst have her for a daughter. I've no more thoughts about myself in that thing, and I shall take it hard if ever thee say'st it again." "Well, well, then thee shouldstna cross me with saying things on her as I say they are." "But, mother," said Seth, "thee'dst be doing Dinah a wrong by telling Adam what thee thinkst about her. It'd do nothing but mischief, for it'd make Adam uneasy if he doesna feel the same to her, and I'm pretty sure he feels nothing of the sort." Dunna tell me what thee'd sure on. Thee know'st naught about it. What's he allus going to the Poysers for if he didn't want to see her? He goes twice where he used to go once. Happen he knowsna as he wants to see her. He knowsna as I put salt in's broth, but he'd miss it pretty quick if it werena there. He'll ne'er think o' marrying if it isna put into's head. And if thee'dst any love for thy mother, thee'dst put him up to it, and not let her go away out o' my sight, when I might ha' her to make a bit o' comfort for me afore I go to bed to my old man under the white thorn." "Nay, mother," said Seth, "thee mustna think me unkind, but I should be going against my conscience if I took upon me to say what Dinah's feelings are. And besides that, I think I should give offence to Adam by speaking to him at all about marrying, and I counsel thee not to do it. Thee mayst be quite deceived about Dinah. Nay, I'm pretty sure by words she said to me last Sabbath, as she's no mind to marry." "Thee't as contrary as the rest on 'em. If it were summat I didna want, it'd be done fast enough." Lisbeth rose from the bench at this, and went out of the workshop, leaving Seth in much anxiety lest she should disturb Adam's mind about Dinah. He consoled himself after a time with reflecting that, since Adam's trouble, Lisbeth had been very timid about speaking to him on matters of feeling, and that she would hardly dare to approach this tenderest of all subjects. Even if she did, he hoped Adam would not take much notice of what she said. Seth was right in believing that Lisbeth would be held in restraint by timidity, and during the next 3 days the intervals in which she had an opportunity of speaking to Adam were too rare and short to cause her any strong temptation. But in her long solitary hours she brooded over her regretful thoughts about Dinah, till they had grown very near that point of unmanageable strength when thoughts are apt to take wing out of their secret nest in a startling manner. And on Sunday morning, when Seth went away to chapel at Treddleston, the dangerous opportunity came. Sunday morning was the happiest time in all the week to Lisbeth, for as there was no service at Hazelip Church till the afternoon, Adam was always at home, doing nothing but reading, an occupation in which she could venture to interrupt him. Moreover, she had always a better dinner than usual to prepare for her sons, very frequently for Adam and herself alone, Seth being often away the entire day, and the smell of the roast meat before the clear fire in the clean kitchen, the clock ticking in a peaceful Sunday manner, her darling Adam seated near her in his best clothes, doing nothing very important, so that she could go and stroke her hand across his hair if she liked, and see him look up at her and smile, while Jip, rather jealous, poked his muzzle up between them. All these things made poor Lisbeth's earthly paradise. The book Adam most often read on the Sunday morning was his large pictured Bible, and this morning it lay open before him on the round white deal table in the kitchen, for he sat there in spite of the fire because he knew his mother liked to have him with her, and it was the only day in the week when he could indulge her in that way. You would have liked to see Adam reading his Bible. He never opened it on a weekday, and so he came to it as a holiday book, serving him for history, biography, and poetry. He held one hand thrust between his waistcoat buttons and the other ready to turn the pages, and in the course of the morning you would have seen many changes in his face. Sometimes his lips moved in semi-articulation. It was when he came to a speech that he could fancy himself uttering, such as Samuel's dying speech to the people. Then his eyebrows would be raised, and the corners of his mouth would quiver a little with sad sympathy. Something, perhaps old Isaac's meeting with his son, touched him closely. At other times, over the New Testament, a very solemn look would come upon his face, and he would every now and then shake his head in serious assent, or just lift up his hand and let it fall again. And on some mornings when he read in the Apocrypha, of which he was very fond, the son of Sirach's keen-edged words would bring a delighted smile, though he also enjoyed the freedom of occasionally differing from an apocryphal writer. For Adam knew the articles quite well, as became a good churchman. Lisbeth, in the pauses of attending to her dinner, always sat opposite to him and watched him till she could rest no longer without going up to him and giving him a caress to call his attention to her. This morning he was reading the Gospel according to St. Matthew, and Lisbeth had been standing close by him for some minutes, stroking his hair, which was smoother than usual this morning, and looking down at the large page with silent wonderment at the mystery of letters. She was encouraged to continue this caress, because when she first went up to him he had thrown himself back in his chair to look at her affectionately and say, "Why, mother, thee looks rare and hearty this morning. Hey, Jip wants me to look at him. He can't abide to think I love thee the best." Lisbeth said nothing, because she wanted to say so many things. And now there was a new leaf to be turned over, and it was a picture, that of the angel seated on the great stone that has been rolled away from the sepulchre. This picture had one strong association in Lisbeth's memory, for she had been reminded of it when she first saw Dinah, and Adam had no sooner turned the page and lifted the book sideways that they might look at the angel than she said, "That's her! That's Dinah!" Adam smiled, and looking more intently at the angel's face, said, "It is a bit like her, but Dinah's prettier, I think." "Well, then, if thee thinks her so pretty, why art fond on her?" Adam looked up in surprise. "Why, mother, dost think I don't set store by Dinah?" "Nay," said Lisbeth, frightened at her own courage, yet feeling she had broken the ice, and the waters must flow, whatever mischief they might do. "What's the use of setting store by things as are 30 mile off? If thee wast fond enough on her, thee wouldst na let her go away." "But I've no right to hinder her if she thinks well," said Adam, looking at his book as if he wanted to go on reading. He foresaw a series of complaints tending to nothing. Lisbeth sat down again in the chair opposite to him as she said, "But she wouldna think well if thee wasna so contrary." Lisbeth dared not venture beyond a vague phrase yet. "Contrary, mother?" Adam said, looking up again in some anxiety. "What have I done? What dost mean?" "Why, thee never look at nothing, nor think of nothing but thy figuring and thy work," said Lisbeth, half crying, "and dost think thee canst go on so all thy life, as if thee wast a man cut out of timber?" And what would do when thy mother's gone, and nobody to take care on thee as thee gets a bit of victual comfortable in the morning?" "What hast got in thy mind, mother?" said Adam, vexed at this whimpering. "I canna see what thee driving at. Is there anything I could do for thee as I don't do?" "Aye, and that there is. Thee might do as I should ha' somebody wi' me to comfort me a bit, and wait on me when I'm bad, and be good to me." "Well, mother, whose fault is it there isna some tidy body o' the house to help thee? It isna by my wish as thee hast a stroke o' work to do. We can afford it. I've told thee often enough. It'd be a deal better for us." What's the use of talking of tidy bodies when thee meanst one of the wenches out of the village, or somebody from Treddleston, as I ne'er set eyes on in my life? I'd sooner make a shift and get into my own coffin afore I die, nor ha' them folks to put me in."
Adam was silent and tried to go on reading. That was the utmost severity he could show towards his mother on a Sunday morning. But Lisbeth had gone too far now to check herself, and after scarcely a minute's quietness she began again.
"Thee mightst know well enough who 'tis I'd like to ha' wi' me. It isna many folks I sent for to come and see me, I reckon. And thee'st had the fetching on her times enow."
"Thee meanst Dinah, mother, I know," said Adam, "but it's no use setting thy mind on what can't be. If Dinah'd be willing to stay at Hazelup, it isn't likely she can come away from her aunt's house, where they hold her like a daughter, and where she's more bound than she is to us. If it had been so that she could have married Seth, that'd have been a great blessing to us. But we can't have things just as we like in this life. Thee must try and make up thy mind to do without her."
"Nay, but I canna make up my mind when she's just cut out for thee, and naught shall make me believe as God didna make her and send her there o' purpose for thee. What's it signify about her being a Methody? It'd happen we're out on her wi' marrying."
Adam threw himself back in his chair and looked at his mother. He understood now what she had been aiming at from the beginning of the conversation. It was as unreasonable, impracticable a wish as she had ever urged, but he could not help being moved by so entirely new an idea. The chief point, however, was to chase away the notion from his mother's mind as quickly as possible. "Mother," he said gravely, "thee talking wild. Don't let me hear thee say such things again. It's no good talking of what can never be. Dinah's not for marrying. She's fixed her heart on a different sort of life."
"Very like," said Lisbeth impatiently, "very like she's none for marrying, when them as she'd be willing to marry wunna ax her. I shouldn't have been for marrying your feyther if he'd ne'er axed me, and she's as fond of thee as e'er I were o' Thias, poor fella."
The blood rushed to Adam's face, and for a few moments he was not quite conscious where he was. His mother and the kitchen had vanished for him, and he saw nothing but Dinah's face turned up towards his. It seemed as if there were a resurrection of his dead joy. But he woke up very speedily from that dream. The waking was chill and sad, for it would have been very foolish in him to believe his mother's words. She could have no ground for them. He was prompted to express his disbelief very strongly, perhaps that he might call forth the proofs, if there were any to be offered. "What dost say such things for, mother, when thee'st got no foundation for 'em? Thee knowst nothing as gives thee a right to say that."
then I known a nought as gies me a right to say as the year's turned, for all I feel it first thing when I get up in the morning. She isn't fond of Seth, I reckon, is she? She doesn't want to marry him. But I can see as she doesn't behave toward thee as she does towards Seth. She makes no more of Seth's coming anigh her nor if he would, Jip. But she's all of a tremble when thee to sitting down by her at breakfast and a looking at her. Thee thinks thy mother knows naught, but she were alive before thee wast born. But thee canst be sure as the trembling means love? Said Adam anxiously. What else should it mean? It isn't hate, I reckon. And what should she do but love thee? Thee't made to be loved, for where's there a straighter, cleverer man? And what's it signify her being a Methody? It's only the marigold of the porridge. Adam had thrust his hands in his pockets and was looking down at the book on the table, without seeing any of the letters. He was trembling like a gold-seeker who sees the strong promise of gold but sees in the same moment a sickening vision of disappointment. He could not trust his mother's insight. She had seen what she wished to see. And yet, now the suggestion had been made to him, he remembered so many things. Very slight things like the stirring of the water by an imperceptible breeze, which seemed to him some confirmation of his mother's words. Lisbeth noticed that he was moved. She went on, "And thee'd find out as thee't poorly off when she's gone. Thee't fonder on her nor thee knowst. Thy eyes follow her about, welly as Gyp's follow thee." Adam could sit still no longer. He rose, took down his hat, and went out into the fields. The sunshine was on them, that early autumn sunshine, which we should know was not summer's, even if there were not the touches of yellow on the lime and chestnut. The Sunday sunshine, too, which has more than autumnal calmness for the working man. The morning sunshine, which still leaves the dew crystals on the fine gossamer webs in the shadow of the bushy hedgerows. Adam needed the calm influence. He was amazed at the way in which this new thought of Dinah's love had taken possession of him, with an overmastering power that made all other feelings give way before the impetuous desire to know that the thought was true. Strange that till that moment the possibility of their ever being lovers had never crossed his mind, and yet now all his longing suddenly went out towards that possibility. He had no more doubt or hesitation as to his own wishes than the bird that flies towards the opening through which the daylight gleams and the breath of heaven enters. The autumnal Sunday sunshine soothed him, but not by preparing him with resignation to the disappointment if his mother, if he himself, proved to be mistaken about Dinah. It soothed him by gentle encouragement of his hopes. Her love was so like that calm sunshine that they seemed to make one presence to him, and he believed in them both alike. And Dinah was so bound up with the sad memories of his first passion that he was not forsaking them, but rather giving them a new sacredness by loving her. Nay, his love for her had grown out of that past. It was the noon of that morning. But Seth, would the lad be hurt? Hardly, for he had seemed quite contented of late, and there was no selfish jealousy in him. He had never been jealous of his mother's fondness for Adam, but had he seen anything of what their mother talked about? Adam longed to know this, for he thought he could trust Seth's observation better than his mother's. He must talk to Seth before he went to see Dinah, and with this intention in his mind, he walked back to the cottage and said to his mother, "Did Seth say anything to thee about when he was coming home? Will he be back to dinner?" "Aye, lad, he'll be back for a wonder. He isna gone to Trelson. He's gone somewhere else a preaching and a praying." "Hast any notion which way he's gone?" said Adam. "Nay, but he often goes to the common. Thee knowst more as goings nor I do." Adam wanted to go and meet Seth, but he must content himself with walking about the near fields and getting sight of him as soon as possible. That would not be for more than an hour to come, for Seth would scarcely be at home much before their dinner time, which was 12 o'clock. But Adam could not sit down to his reading again, and he sauntered along by the brook and stood leaning against the stiles with eager, intense eyes, which looked as if they saw something very vividly. But it was not the brook or the willows, not the fields or the sky. Again and again his vision was interrupted by wonder at the strength of his own feeling, at the strength and sweetness of this new love, almost like the wonder a man feels at the added power he finds in himself for an art which he had laid aside for a space. How is it that the poets have said so many fine things about our first love, so few about our later love? Are their first poems their best? Or are not those the best which come from their fuller thought, their larger experience, their deeper-rooted affections? The boy's flute-like voice has its own spring charm, but the man should yield a richer, deeper music. At last there was Seth, visible at the farthest stile, and Adam hastened to meet him. Seth was surprised and thought something unusual must have happened, but when Adam came up, his face said plainly enough that it was nothing alarming. "Where hast been?" said Adam when they were side by side. "I've been to the common," said Seth. "Dinah's been speaking the word to a little company of hearers at Brimstones, as they call him. They're folks as never go to church hardly, them on the common, but they'll go and hear Dinah a bit. She's been speaking with power this forenoon from the words, 'I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance.' And there was a little thing happened as was pretty to see. The women mostly bring their children with them, but today there was one stout, curly-headed fellow about 3 or 4 year old that I never saw there before. He was as naughty as could be at the beginning while I was praying and while we were singing, but when we all sat down and Dinah began to speak, the young un stood stock still all at once and began to look at her with mouth open, and presently he ran away from's mother and went to Dinah and pulled at her like a little dog for her to take notice of him. So Dinah lifted him up and held the lad on her lap, while she went on speaking, and he was as good as could be till he went to sleep, and the mother cried to see him." "It's a pity she shouldna be a mother herself," said Adam, "so fond as the children are of her. Dost think she's quite fixed against marrying, Seth? Dost think nothing 'ud turn her?" There was something peculiar in his brother's tone which made Seth steal a glance at his face before he answered. "It'd be wrong of me to say nothing 'ud turn her," he answered, "but if thee meanst it about myself, I've given up all thoughts as she can ever be my wife. She calls me her brother, and that's enough. But dost think she might ever get fond enough of anybody else to be willing to marry 'em?" said Adam rather shyly. "Well," said Seth, after some hesitation, "it's crossed my mind sometimes of late as she might, but Dinah had let no fondness for the creature draw her out of the path as she believed God had marked out for her. If she thought the leading was not from him, she's not one to be brought under the power of it. And she's allers seemed clear about that, as her work was to minister to others, and make no home for herself in this world. But suppose, said Adam earnestly, suppose there was a man as had let her do just the same, and not interfere with her. She might do a good deal of what she does now, just as well when she was married as when she was single. Other women of her sort have married, that's to say, not just like her, but women as preached and attended on the sick and needy. There's Mrs. Fletcher, as she talks of. A new light had broken in on Seth. He turned round and, laying his hand on Adam's shoulder, said, "Why wouldst like her to marry thee, brother?" Adam looked doubtfully at Seth's inquiring eyes and said, "Wouldst be hurt if she was to be fonder of me than of thee?" "Nay," said Seth warmly, "how canst think it? Have I felt thy trouble so little that I shouldna feel thy joy?" There was silence a few moments as they walked on, and then Seth said, "I'd no notion as thee'dst ever think of her for a wife." "But is it o' any use to think of her?" said Adam. "What dost say? Mother's made me as I hardly know what I am with what she's been saying to me this forenoon. She says she's sure Dinah feels for me more than common, and 'ud be willing to have me. But I'm afraid she speaks without book. I want to know if thee'st seen anything." "It's a nice point to speak about," said Seth, "and I'm afraid of being wrong. Besides, we've no right to intermeddle with people's feelings when they wouldn't tell them themselves." Seth paused. "But thee mightst ask her," he said presently. "She took no offence at me for asking, and thee'st more right than I had, only thee'd not in the society. But Dinah doesn't hold with them as are for keeping the society so strict to themselves. She doesn't mind about making folks enter the society so as they're fit to enter the kingdom of God. Some of the brethren at Treddleston are displeased with her for that." "Where will she be the rest of the day?" said Adam. "She said she shouldn't leave the farm again today," said Seth, "because it's her last Sabbath there, and she's going to read out of the big Bible with the children." Adam thought, but did not say, "Then I'll go this afternoon, for if I go to church my thoughts'll be with her all the while. They must sing the anthem without me today." Chapter 52. Adam and Dinah. It was about 3 o'clock when Adam entered the farmyard and roused Alec and the dogs from their Sunday dozing. Alec said everybody was gone to church but the young missus, so he called Dinah, but this did not disappoint Adam, although the everybody was so liberal as to include Nancy the dairymaid, whose works of necessity were not unfrequently incompatible with church-going. There was perfect stillness about the house. The doors were all closed, and the very stones and tubs seemed quieter than usual. Adam heard the water gently dripping from the pump. That was the only sound, and he knocked at the house door rather softly, as was suitable in that stillness. The door opened, and Dinah stood before him, colouring deeply with the great surprise of seeing Adam at this hour, when she knew it was his regular practice to be at church. Yesterday he would have said to her without any difficulty, "I came to see you, Dinah. I knew the rest were not at home." But today something prevented him from saying that, and he put out his hand to her in silence. Neither of them spoke, and yet both wished they could speak, as Adam entered and they sat down. Dinah took the chair she had just left. It was at the corner of the table near the window, and there was a book lying on the table, but it was not open. She had been sitting perfectly still, looking at the small bit of clear fire in the bright grate. Adam sat down opposite her, in Mr. Poyser's three-cornered chair. "Your mother is not ill again, I hope, Adam?" said Dinah, recovering herself. "Seth said she was well this morning." "No, she's very hearty today," said Adam, happy in the signs of Dinah's feeling at the sight of him, but shy. "There's nobody at home, you see," Dinah said, "but you'll wait. You've been hindered from going to church today, doubtless." "Yes," Adam said, and then paused before he added, "I was thinking about you. That was the reason." This confession was very awkward and sudden, Adam felt, for he thought Dinah must understand all he meant. But the frankness of the words caused her immediately to interpret them into a renewal of his brotherly regrets that she was going away, and she answered calmly, "Do not be careful and troubled for me, Adam. I have all things and abound at Snowfield, and my mind is at rest, for I am not seeking my own will in going." "But if things were different, Dinah," said Adam hesitatingly, "if you knew things that perhaps you don't know now." Dinah looked at him inquiringly, but instead of going on, he reached a chair and brought it near the corner of the table where she was sitting. She wondered and was afraid, and the next moment her thoughts flew to the past. Was it something about those distant unhappy ones that she didn't know? Adam looked at her. It was so sweet to look at her eyes, which had now a self-forgetful questioning in them. For a moment he forgot that he wanted to say anything, or that it was necessary to tell her what he meant. "Dinah," he said suddenly, taking both her hands between his, "I love you with my whole heart and soul. I love you next to God who made me." Dinah's lips became pale like her cheeks, and she trembled violently under the shock of painful joy. Her hands were cold as death between Adam's. She could not draw them away because he held them fast. "Don't tell me you can't love me, Dinah. Don't tell me we must part and pass our lives away from one another." The tears were trembling in Dinah's eyes, and they fell before she could answer, but she spoke in a quiet, low voice. "Yes, dear Adam, we must submit to another will. We must part." "Not if you love me, Dinah, not if you love me," Adam said passionately. Tell me if you can love me better than a brother." Dinah was too entirely reliant on the supreme guidance to attempt to achieve any end by a deceptive concealment. She was recovering now from the first shock of emotion, and she looked at Adam with simple, sincere eyes as she said, "Yes, Adam, my heart is drawn strongly towards you, and of my own will, if I had no clear showing to the contrary, I could find my happiness in being near you and ministering to you continually. I fear I should forget to rejoice and weep with others. Nay, I fear I should forget the divine presence and seek no love but yours." Adam did not speak immediately. They sat looking at each other in delicious silence, for the first sense of mutual love excludes other feelings. It will have the soul all to itself. "Then, Dinah," Adam said at last, How can there be anything contrary to what's right in our belonging to one another and spending our lives together? Who put this great love into our hearts? Can anything be holier than that? For we can help one another in everything as is good. I'd never think of putting myself between you and God, and saying you oughtn't to do this and you oughtn't to do that. You'd follow your conscience as much as you do now." "Yes, Adam," Dinah said, "I know marriage is a holy state for those who are truly called to it and have no other drawing. But from my childhood upwards I have been led towards another path. All my peace and my joy have come from having no life of my own, no wants, no wishes for myself, and living only in God and those of his creatures whose sorrows and joys he has given me to know. Those have been very blessed years to me, and I feel that if I was to listen to any voice that would draw me aside from that path, I should be turning my back on the light that has shone upon me, and darkness and doubt would take hold of me. We could not bless each other, Adam, if there were doubts in my soul, and if I yearned when it was too late, after that better part which had once been given me, and I had put away from me. But if a new feeling has come into your mind, Dinah, and if you love me so as to be willing to be nearer to me than to other people, isn't that a sign that it's right for you to change your life? Doesn't the love make it right when nothing else would?" "Adam, my mind is full of questionings about that. For now, since you tell me of your strong love towards me, what was clear to me has become dark again. I felt before that my heart was too strongly drawn towards you, and that your heart was not as mine, and the thought of you had taken hold of me, so that my soul had lost its freedom, and was becoming enslaved to an earthly affection, which made me anxious and careful about what should befall myself. For in all other affection I had been content with any small return, or with none. But my heart was beginning to hunger after an equal love from you, and I had no doubt that I must wrestle against that as a great temptation, and the command was clear that I must go away. But now, dear, dear Dinah, now you know I love you better than you love me. It's all different now. You won't think of going. You'll stay and be my dear wife, and I shall thank God for giving me my life as I never thanked him before." "Adam, it's hard to me to turn a deaf ear. You know it's hard. But a great fear is upon me. It seems to me as if you were stretching out your arms to me and beckoning me to come and take my ease and live for my own delight. And Jesus, the man of sorrows, was standing looking towards me and pointing to the sinful and suffering and afflicted. I have seen that again and again when I have been sitting in stillness and darkness, and a great terror has come upon me, lest I should become hard and a lover of self, and no more bear willingly the Redeemer's cross." Dinah had closed her eyes, and a faint shudder went through her. "Adam," she went on, "you wouldn't desire that we should seek a good through any unfaithfulness to the light that is in us. You wouldn't believe that could be a good. We are of one mind in that." "Yes, Dinah," said Adam sadly, "I'll never be the man to urge you against your conscience. But I can't give up the hope that you may come to see different. I don't believe your loving me could shut up your heart. It's only adding to what you've been before, not taking away from it. For it seems to me it's the same with love and happiness as with sorrow. The more we know of it, the better we can feel what other people's lives are or might be, and so we shall only be more tender to 'em, and wishful to help 'em. The more knowledge a man has, the better he'll do's work, and feeling's a sort of knowledge."
Dinah was silent. Her eyes were fixed in contemplation of something visible only to herself. Adam went on presently with his pleading.
"And you can do almost as much as you do now. I won't ask you to go to church with me of a Sunday. You shall go where you like among the people and teach 'em, for though I like church best, I don't put my soul above yours as if my words was better for you to follow than your own conscience. And you can help the sick just as much, and you'll have more means of making 'em a bit comfortable, and you'll be among all your own friends as love you and can help 'em and be a blessing to 'em till their dying day. Surely, Dinah, you'd be as near to God as if you was living lonely and away from me."
Dinah made no answer for some time. Adam was still holding her hands and looking at her with almost trembling anxiety, when she turned her grave, loving eyes on his and said, in a rather sad voice, "Adam, there is truth in what you say, and there's many of the brethren and sisters who have greater strength than I have, and find their hearts enlarged by the cares of husband and kindred. But I have not faith that it would be so with me, for since my affections have been set above measure on you, I have had less peace and joy in God. I have felt as it were a division in my heart. And think how it is with me, Adam. That life I have led is like a land I have trodden in blessedness since my childhood, and if I long for a moment to follow the voice which calls me to another land that I know not, I cannot but fear that my soul might hereafter yearn for that early blessedness which I had forsaken, and where doubt enters, there is not perfect love. I must wait for clearer guidance. I must go from you, and we must submit ourselves entirely to the divine will. We are sometimes required to lay our natural lawful affections on the altar."
Adam dared not plead again, for Dinah's was not the voice of caprice or insincerity. But it was very hard for him. His eyes got dim as he looked at her. "But you may come to feel satisfied, to feel that you may come to me again, and we may never part, Dinah."
"We must submit ourselves, Adam. With time our duty will be made clear. It may be, when I have entered on my former life, I shall find all these new thoughts and wishes vanish, and become as things that were not. Then I shall know that my calling is not towards marriage. But we must wait."
"Dinah," said Adam mournfully, "you can't love me so well as I love you, else you'd have no doubts. But it's natural you shouldn't, for I'm not so good as you. I can't doubt it's right for me to love the best thing God's ever given me to know."
"Nay, Adam, it seems to me that my love for you is not weak, for my heart waits on your words and looks almost as a little child waits on the help and tenderness of the strong on whom it depends. If the thought of you took slight hold of me, I should not fear that it would be an idol in the temple. But you will strengthen me. You will not hinder me in seeking to obey to the uttermost."
"Let us go out into the sunshine, Dinah, and walk together. I'll speak no word to disturb you. They went out and walked towards the fields, where they would meet the family coming from church. Adam said, "Take my arm, Dinah," and she took it. That was the only change in their manner to each other since they were last walking together. But no sadness in the prospect of her going away, in the uncertainty of the issue, could rob the sweetness from Adam's sense that Dinah loved him. He thought he would stay at the Hall Farm all that evening. He would be near her as long as he could. "Hey, Day, there's Adam along with Dinah," said Mr. Poyser as he opened the far gate into the home close. "I couldn't think how he happened away from church. Why," added good Martin, after a moment's pause, "what does think has just jumped into my head?" "Summat as hadna far to jump, for it's just under our nose. You mean as Adam's fond of Dinah?" "Aye, hast ever had any notion of it before?" "To be sure I have," said Mrs. Poyser, who always declined, if possible, to be taken by surprise. "I'm not one of those as can see the cat of the dairy and wonder what she's come after." "Thee never saidst a word to me about it." "Well, I aren't like a bird clapper, forced to make a rattle when the wind blows on me. I can keep my own counsel when there's no good of speaking." "But Dinah'll ha' none o' him. Dost think she will?" "Nay," said Mrs. Poyser, not sufficiently on her guard against a possible surprise. "She'll never marry anybody, if he isn't a Methodist and a cripple." "It'd ha' been a pretty thing, though, for 'em to marry," said Martin, turning his head on one side, as if in pleased contemplation of his new idea. "Thee'dst ha' liked it too, wouldstn't it?" "Ah, I should. I should have been sure of her then, as she wouldn't go away from me to Snowfield, welly 30 mile off, and me not got a creature to look to, only neighbours as are no kin to me, and most of 'em women as I'd be ashamed to show my face if my dairy things were like then. There may well be stricky butter i' the market, and I should be glad to see the poor thing settled like a Christian woman with a house of her own over her head. And we'd stock her well with linen and feathers, for I love her next to my own children. And she makes one feel safer when she's i' the house, for she's like the driven snow. Anybody might sin for two as had her at their elbow." "Dinah," said Tommy, running forward to meet her, "mother says you never marry anybody but a Methodist cripple. What a silly you must be." A comment which Tommy followed up by seizing Dinah with both arms and dancing along by her side with incommodious fondness. "Why, Adam, we missed you with the singing today," said Mr. Poyser. "How was it?" "I wanted to see Dinah. She's going away so soon," said Adam. "Ah, lad, can you persuade her to stop somehow? Find her a good husband somewhere in the parish. If you'll do that, we'll forgive you for missing church. But anyway, she isn't a-going before the harvest supper o' Wednesday, and you must come then. There's Bartle Massey coming, and happen Craig. You'll be sure and come now at 7. The missus wunna have it a bit later." "Aye," said Adam, "I'll come if I can, but I can't often say what I'll do beforehand, for the work often holds me longer than I expect. You'll stay till the end of the week, Dinah?" Yes, said Mr. Poyser. "We'll have no nay." "She's no call to be in a hurry," observed Mrs. Poyser. "Scarceness of victual'll keep. There's no need to be hasty with the cooking, and scarceness is what there's the biggest stock of i' that country." Dinah smiled, but gave no promise to stay, and they talked of other things through the rest of the walk, lingering in the sunshine to look at the great flock of geese grazing at the new corn ricks, and at the surprising abundance of fruit on the old pear tree. Nancy and Molly having already hastened home side by side, each holding, carefully wrapped in her pocket handkerchief, a prayer book, in which she could read little beyond the large letters and the amens. Surely all other leisure is hurry compared with a sunny walk through the fields from afternoon church, as such walks used to be in those old leisurely times, when the boat, gliding sleepily along the canal, was the newest locomotive wonder, when Sunday books had most of them old brown leather covers and opened with remarkable precision, always in one place. Leisure is gone, gone where the spinning wheels are gone, and the pack horses, and the slow wagons, and the pedlars who brought bargains to the door on sunny afternoons. Ingenious philosophers tell you, perhaps, that the great work of the steam engine is to create leisure for mankind. Do not believe them. It only creates a vacuum for eager thought to rush in. Even idleness is eager now, eager for amusement, prone to excursion trains, art museums, periodical literature, and exciting novels, prone even to scientific theorizing and cursory peeps through microscopes. Old Leisure was quite a different personage. He only read one newspaper, innocent of leaders, and was free from that periodicity of sensations which we call post-time. He was a contemplative, rather stout gentleman, of excellent digestion, of quiet perceptions, undiseased by hypothesis, happy in his inability to know the causes of things, preferring the things themselves. He lived chiefly in the country, among pleasant seats and homesteads, and was fond of sauntering by the fruit-tree wall, and scenting the apricots when they were warmed by the morning sunshine, or of sheltering himself under the orchard boughs at noon, when the summer pears were falling. He knew nothing of weekday services, and thought none the worse of the Sunday sermon if it allowed him to sleep from the text to the blessing. Liking the afternoon service best because the prayers were the shortest, and not ashamed to say so. For he had an easy, jolly conscience, broad-backed like himself, and able to carry a great deal of beer or port wine, not being made squeamish by doubts and qualms and lofty aspirations. Life was not a task to him, but a sinecure. He fingered the guineas in his pocket, and ate his dinners, and slept the sleep of the irresponsible, for had he not kept up his character by going to church on the Sunday afternoons? Fine old Leisure! Do not be severe upon him, and judge him by our modern standard. He never went to Exeter Hall, or heard a popular preacher, or read tracts for the Times, or Sartor Resartus. Chapter 53. The Harvest Supper. As Adam was going homeward on Wednesday evening, in the 6 o'clock sunlight, he saw in the distance the last load of barley winding its way towards the yard gate of the Hall farm, and heard the chant of "Harvest Home" rising and sinking like a wave. Fainter and fainter, and more musical through the growing distance, the falling, dying sound still reached him as he neared the Willow Brook. The low westering sun shone right on the shoulders of the old Binton Hills, turning the unconscious sheep into bright spots of light, shone on the windows of the cottage too, and made them aflame with a glory beyond that of amber or amethyst. It was enough to make Adam feel that he was in a great temple, and that the distant chant was a sacred song. "It's wonderful," he thought, "how that sound goes to one's heart almost like a funeral bell, for all it tells one of the joyfullest time of the year, and the time when men are mostly the thankfullest. I suppose it's a bit hard on us to think anything's over and gone in our lives, and there's a parting at the root of all our joys. It's like what I feel about Dinah. I should never have come to know that her love would be the greatest of blessings to me if what I counted a blessing hadn't been wrenched and torn away from me and left me with a greater need, so as I could crave and hunger for a greater and a better comfort. He expected to see Dinah again this evening, and get leave to accompany her as far as Oakbourne, and then he would ask her to fix some time when he might go to Snowfield and learn whether the last best hope that had been born to him must be resigned like the rest. The work he had to do at home, besides putting on his best clothes, made it 7 before he was on his way again to the Hall Farm, and it was questionable whether, with his longest and quickest strides, he should be there in time even for the roast beef, which came after the plum pudding, for Mrs. Poyser's supper would be punctual. Great was the clatter of knives and pewter plates and tin cans when Adam entered the house, but there was no hum of voices to this accompaniment. The eating of excellent roast beef, provided free of expense, was too serious a business to those good farm labourers to be performed with a divided attention, even if they had had anything to say to each other, which they had not. And Mr. Poyser, at the head of the table, was too busy with his carving to listen to Bartle Massey's or Mr. Craig's ready talk. "Here, Adam," said Mrs. Poyser, who was standing and looking on to see that Molly and Nancy did their duty as waiters. "Here's a place kept for you between Mr. Massey and the boys. It's a poor tale you couldn't come to see the pudding when it was whole." Adam looked anxiously round for a 4th woman's figure, but Dinah was not there. He was almost afraid of asking about her. Besides, his attention was claimed by greetings, and there remained the hope that Dinah was in the house, though perhaps disinclined to festivities on the eve of her departure. It was a goodly sight, that table, with Martin Poyser's round, good-humoured face and large person at the head of it, helping his servants to the fragrant roast beef, and pleased when the empty plates came again. Martin, though usually blessed with a good appetite, really forgot to finish his own beef tonight. It was so pleasant to him to look on in the intervals of carving and see how the others enjoyed their supper. For were they not men who on all the days of the year, except Christmas Day and Sundays, ate their cold dinner in a makeshift manner under the hedgerows, and drank their beer out of wooden bottles, with relish certainly, but with their mouths towards the zenith, after a fashion more endurable to ducks than to human bipeds? Martin Poyser had some faint conception of the flavour such men must find in hot roast beef and fresh-drawn ale. He held his head on one side and screwed up his mouth as he nudged Bartle Massey and watched half-witted Tom Tholer, otherwise known as Tom Saft, receiving his 2nd plateful of beef. A grin of delight broke over Tom's face as the plate was set down before him between his knife and fork, which he held erect as if they had been sacred tapers. But the delight was too strong to continue smouldering in a grin. It burst out the next instant in a long-drawn "haw, haw," followed by a sudden collapse into utter gravity as the knife and fork darted down on the prey. Martin Poyser's large person shook with his silent, unctuous laugh. He turned towards Mrs. Poyser to see if she too had been observant of Tom, and the eyes of husband and wife met in a glance of good-natured amusement. Tom Saft was a great favourite on the farm, where he played the part of the old jester, and made up for his practical deficiencies by his success in repartee. His hits, I imagine, were those of the flail, which falls quite at random, but nevertheless smashes an insect now and then. They were much quoted at sheep-shearing and haymaking times, but I refrain from recording them here, lest Tom's wit should prove to be like that of many other bygone jesters eminent in their day, rather of a temporary nature, not dealing with the deeper and more lasting relations of things. Tom accepted Martin Poyser had some pride in his servants and labourers, thinking with satisfaction that they were the best worth their pay of any set on the estate. There was Kester Bale, for example. Beale, probably, if the truth were known, but he was called Bale, and was not conscious of any claim to a fifth letter. The old man with the close leather cap and the network of wrinkles on his sun-browned face. Was there any man in Loamshire who knew better the nature of all farming work? He was one of those invaluable labourers who can not only turn their hand to everything, but excel in everything they turn their hand to. It is true Kester's knees were much bent outward by this time, and he walked with a perpetual curtsy, as if he were among the most reverent of men. And so he was. But I am obliged to admit that the object of his reverence was his own skill, towards which he performed some rather affecting acts of worship. He always thatched the ricks, for if anything were his forte more than another, it was thatching, and when the last touch had been put to the last beehive rick, Kester, whose home lay at some distance from the farm, would take a walk to the rickyard in his best clothes on a Sunday morning, and stand in the lane, at a due distance, to contemplate his own thatching, walking about to get each rick from the proper point of view. As he curtsied along, with his eyes upturned to the straw knobs, imitative of golden globes, at the summits of the beehive ricks, which indeed were gold of the best sort, you might have imagined him to be engaged in some pagan act of adoration. Kester was an old bachelor, and reputed to have stockings full of coin, concerning which his master cracked a joke with him every pay night. Not a new, unseasoned joke, but a good old one that had been tried many times before, and had worn well. "The young maester's a merry mon," Kester frequently remarked, for having begun his career by frightening away the crows under the last Martin Poyser but one, he could never cease to account the reigning Martin a young master. I am not ashamed of commemorating old Kester. You and I are indebted to the hard hands of such men, hands that have long ago mingled with the soil they tilled so faithfully, thriftily making the best they could of the earth's fruits, and receiving the smallest share as their own wages. Then, at the end of the table, opposite his master, there was Alick, the shepherd and head man, with the ruddy face and broad shoulders, not on the best terms with old Kester. Indeed, their intercourse was confined to an occasional snarl, for though they probably differed little concerning hedging and ditching and the treatment of ewes, there was a profound difference of opinion between them as to their own respective merits. When Tityrus and Melibœus happen to be on the same farm, they are not sentimentally polite to each other. Alick, indeed, was not by any means a honeyed man. His speech had usually something of a snarl in it, and his broad-shouldered aspect something of the bulldog expression. "Don't you meddle with me, and I won't meddle with you." But he was honest, even to the splitting of an oat grain, rather than he would take beyond his acknowledged share, and as close-fisted with his master's property as if it had been his own, throwing very small handfuls of damaged barley to the chickens, because a large handful affected his imagination painfully with a sense of profusion. Good-tempered Tim, the waggoner, who loved his horses, had his grudge against Alick in the matter of corn. They rarely spoke to each other, and never looked at each other, even over their dish of cold potatoes. But then, as this was their usual mode of behaviour towards all mankind, it would be an unsafe conclusion that they had more than transient fits of unfriendliness. The bucolic character at Hayslip, you perceive, was not of that entirely genial, merry, broad-grinning sort apparently observed in most districts visited by artists. The mild radiance of a smile was a rare sight on a field labourer's face, and there was seldom any gradation between bovine gravity and a laugh. Nor was every labourer so honest as our friend Alick. At this very table, among Mr. Poyser's men, there is that big Ben Followay, a very powerful thresher, but detected more than once in carrying away his master's corn in his pockets, an action which, as Ben was not a philosopher, could hardly be ascribed to absence of mind. However, his master had forgiven him, and continued to employ him, for the Tholoways had lived on the common time out of mind, and had always worked for the Poysers. And on the whole, I dare say, society was not much the worse because Ben had not 6 months of it at the treadmill, for his views of depredation were narrow, and the House of Correction might have enlarged them. As it was, Ben ate his roast beef tonight with a serene sense of having stolen nothing more than a few peas and beans as seed for his garden since the last harvest supper, and felt warranted in thinking that Alick's suspicious eye, forever upon him, was an injury to his innocence. But now the roast beef was finished, and the cloth was drawn, leaving a fair large deal table for the bright drinking cans, and the foaming brown jugs, and the bright brass candlesticks, pleasant to behold. Now the great ceremony of the evening was to begin, the harvest song, in which every man must join. He might be in tune if he liked to be singular, but he must not sit with closed lips. The movement was obliged to be in triple time. The rest was ad libitum. As to the origin of this song, whether it came in its actual state from the brain of a single rhapsodist, or was gradually perfected by a school or succession of rhapsodists, I am ignorant. There is a stamp of unity, of individual genius upon it, which inclines me to the former hypothesis, though I am not blind to the consideration that this unity may rather have arisen from that consensus of many minds which was a condition of primitive thought foreign to our modern consciousness. Some will perhaps think that they detect in the first quatrain an indication of a lost line which later rhapsodists, failing in imaginative vigour, have supplied by the feeble device of iteration. Others, however, may rather maintain that this very iteration is an original felicity to which none but the most prosaic minds can be insensible. The ceremony connected with the song was a drinking ceremony. That is perhaps a painful fact. But then, you know, we cannot reform our forefathers. During the first and second quatrain, sung decidedly forte, no can was filled. Here's a health unto our master, the founder of the feast. Here's a health unto our master and to our mistress. And may his doings prosper, whate'er he takes in hand, for we are all his servants, and are at his command. But now Immediately before the third quatrain or chorus, sung fortissimo, with emphatic raps of the table, which gave the effect of cymbals and drum together, Alec's can was filled, and he was bound to empty it before the chorus ceased. "Then drink, boys, drink, and see that you do not spill, for if you do, you shall drink too, for 'tis our master's will." When Alec had gone successfully through his test of steady-handed manliness, it was the turn of old Kester at his right hand, and so on till every man had drunk his initiatory pint under the stimulus of the chorus. Tom Saft, the rogue, took care to spill a little by accident, but Mrs. Poyser, too officiously Tom thought, interfered to prevent the exaction of the penalty. To any listener outside the door, it would have been the reverse of obvious why the "drink, boys, drink" should have such an immediate and often repeated encore. But once entered, he would have seen that all faces were at present sober, and most of them serious. It was the regular and respectable thing for those excellent farm labourers to do, as much as for elegant ladies and gentlemen to smirk and bow over their wine-glasses. Bartle Massey, whose ears were rather sensitive, had gone out to see what sort of evening it was at an early stage in the ceremony, and had not finished his contemplation until a silence of 5 minutes declared that "drink, boys, drink" was not likely to begin again for the next 12-month. Much to the regret of the boys and Totty, on them the stillness fell rather flat after that glorious thumping of the table, towards which Totty, seated on her father's knee, contributed with her small might and small fist. When Bartle re-entered, however, there appeared to be a general desire for solo music after the choral. Nancy declared that Tim the Waggoner knew a song and was "allus singing like a lark in the stable," whereupon Mr. Poyser said encouragingly, "Come, Tim, lad, let's hear it." Tim looked sheepish, tucked down his head, and said he couldn't sing. But this encouraging invitation of the master's was echoed all round the table. It was a conversational opportunity. Everybody could say, "Come, Tim," except Alec, who never relaxed into the frivolity of unnecessary speech. At last, Tim's next neighbour, Ben Followay, began to give emphasis to his speech by nudges, at which Tim, growing rather savage, said, "Let me alone, will ye, as I'll make ye sing a tune you wunna like." A good-tempered waggoner's patience has limits, and Tim was not to be urged further. "Well then, David, you're the lad to sing," said Ben, willing to show that he was not discomfited by this check. "Sing 'My love's a rose wi'out a thorn.'" The amatory David was a young man of an unconscious, abstracted expression, which was due probably to a squint of superior intensity rather than to any mental characteristic. For he was not indifferent to Ben's invitation, but blushed and laughed and rubbed his sleeve over his mouth in a way that was regarded as a symptom of yielding. And for some time the company appeared to be much in earnest about the desire to hear David's song. But in vain. The lyricism of the evening was in the cellar at present, and was not to be drawn from that retreat just yet. Meanwhile, the conversation at the head of the table had taken a political turn. Mr. Craig was not above talking politics occasionally, though he piqued himself rather on a wise insight than on specific information. He saw so far beyond the mere facts of a case that it really was superfluous to know them. "I'm no reader of the paper myself," he observed tonight as he filled his pipe, "though I might read it fast enough if I liked, for there's Miss Liddy has 'em, and's done with 'em in no time. But there's Mills now, sits at the chimney corner and reads the paper pretty nigh from morning to night. And when he's got to the end on't, he's more addle-headed than he was at the beginning. He's full of this peace now as they talk on. He's been reading and thinks he's got to the bottom on't. Why, Lord bless you, Mills, says I, you see no more into this thing nor you can see into the middle of a potato. I'll tell you what it is, you think it'll be a fine thing for the country, and I'm not agin it. Mark my words, I'm not agin it. But it's my opinion as there's them at the head of this country as are worse enemies to us nor Boney and all the Mounseers he's got at's back. For as for the Mounseers, you may skewer half a dozen of 'em at once, as if they were frogs. Aye, aye, said Martin Poyser, listening with an air of much intelligence and edification. They narrate a bit of beef i' their lives, mostly sallet, I reckon. And says I to Mills, continued Mr. Craig, will you try to make me believe as furriners like them can do as half the harm them ministers do with their bad government? If King George had turned 'em all away and governed by himself, he'd see everything righted. He might take on Billy Pitt again if he liked, but I don't see myself what we want wi' anybody besides King and Parliament. It's that nest of ministers does the mischief, I tell you. It's fine talking, observed Mrs. Poyser, who was now seated near her husband, with Totty on her lap. It's fine talking. It's hard work to tell which is old Harry when everybody's got boots on. As for this piece, said Mr. Poyser, turning his head on one side in a dubitative manner, and giving a precautionary puff to his pipe between each sentence, I don't know. The war's a fine thing for the country, and how'll you keep up prices without it? And them French are a wicked sort of folks, by what I can make out. What can you do better nor fight 'em? You're partly right there, Poyser, said Mr. Craig, but I'm not again the peace to make a holiday for a bit. We can break it when we like, and I'm in no fear of Boney, for all they talk so much of his cleverness. That's what I says to Mills this morning. Lord bless you, he sees no more through Boney. Why, I put him up to more in 3 minutes than he gets from's paper all the year round. Says I, am I a gardener as knows his business, or aren't I, Mills? Answer me that. To be sure you are, Craig, he says, but he's not a bad fellow, Mills isn't, for a butler, but weak i' the head. Well, says I, you talk of Boney's cleverness. Would it be any use my being a first-rate gardener if I'd got naught but a quagmire to work on? No, says he. Well, I says, that's just what it is wi' Boney. I'll not deny but he may be a bit clever. He's no Frenchman born, as I understand. But what's he got at's back but Mounseers? Mr. Craig paused a moment with an emphatic stare after this triumphant specimen of Socratic argument, and then added, thumping the table rather fiercely, Why, it's a sure thing, and there's them as'll bear witness to it, as i' one regiment where there was one man a-missing, they put the regimentals on a big monkey, and they fit him as the shell fits the walnut, and you couldn't tell the monkey from the Mounseers. Ah, think o' that now, said Mr. Poyser, impressed at once with the political bearings of the fact, and with its striking interest as an anecdote in natural history. Come, Craig, said Adam, that's a little too strong. You don't believe that. It's all nonsense about the French being such poor sticks. Mr. Irwine's seen 'em in their own country, and he says they've plenty of fine fellows among 'em. And as for knowledge and contrivances and manufactures, there's a many things as we're a fine sight behind 'em in. It's poor foolishness to run down your enemies. Why, Nelson and the rest of 'em 'ud have no merit of beating 'em if they were such offal as folks pretend." Mr. Poyser looked doubtfully at Mr. Craig, puzzled by this opposition of authorities. Mr. Irwine's testimony was not to be disputed, but on the other hand Craig was a knowing fellow, and his view was less startling. Martin had never heard tell of the French being good for much. Mr. Craig had found no answer, but such as was implied in taking a long draught of ale, and then looking down fixedly at the proportions of his own leg, which he turned a little outward for that purpose. When Bartle Massey returned from the fireplace, where he had been smoking his first pipe in quiet, and broke the silence by saying, as he thrust his forefinger into the canister, "Why, Adam, how happened you not to be at church on Sunday? Answer me that, you rascal! The anthem went limping without you. Are you going to disgrace your schoolmaster in his old age?" "No, Mr. Massey," said Adam. "Mr. and Mrs. Poyser can tell you where I was. I was in no bad company." "She's gone, Adam, gone to Snowfield," said Mr. Poyser, reminded of Dinah for the first time this evening. "I thought you'd have persuaded her better. Naught had hold her, but she must go yesterday forenoon. The missus has hardly got over it. I thought she'd had no spirit for the harvest supper." Mrs. Poyser had thought of Dinah several times since Adam had come in, but she had had no heart to mention the bad news. "What?" said Bartle, with an air of disgust. "Was there a woman concerned? Then I give you up, Adam." "But it's a woman you've spoken well on, Bartle," said Mr. Poyser. "Come now, you canna draw back. You said once as women wouldn't have been a bad invention if they'd all been like Dinah." "I meant her voice, man, I meant her voice, that was all," said Bartle. "I can bear to hear her speak without wanting to put wool in my ears. As for other things, I dare say she's like the rest of the women, thinks 2 and 2 will come to make 5 if she cries and bothers enough about it." "Aye, aye," said Mrs. Poyser. "One 'ud think and hear some folks talk as the men war cute enough to count the corns in a bag of wheat wi' only smelling at it. They can see through a barn door, they can. Perhaps that's the reason they can see so little of this side on't." Martin Poyser shook with delighted laughter and winked at Adam, as much as to say the schoolmaster was in for it now. "Yah," said Bartle sneeringly, "the women are quick enough. They're quick enough. They know the rights of a story before they hear it, and can tell a man what his thoughts are before he knows them himself." "Like enough," said Mrs. Poyser, "for the men are mostly so slow their thoughts overrun 'em, and they can only catch 'em by the tail. I can count a stocking top while a man's getting stung ready, and when he outs wi' his speech at last, there's little broth to be made on't. It's your dead chicks take the longest hatching. However, I'm not denying the women are foolish. God Almighty made 'em to match the men." "Match?" said Bartle. "Aye, as the vinegar matches one's teeth. If a man says a word, his wife'll match it with a contradiction. If he's a mind for hot meat, his wife'll match it with cold bacon. If he laughs, she'll match him with whimpering. She's such a match as the horsefly is to the horse. She's got the right venom to sting him with. The right venom to sting him with." "Yes," said Mrs. Poyser, "I know what the men like. A poor soft. as 'ud simper at 'em like the picture of the sun, whether they did right or wrong, and say thank you for a kick, and pretend she didn't know which end she stood uppermost, till her husband told her. That's what a man wants in a wife, mostly. He wants to make sure of one fool as'll tell him he's wise. But there's some men can do without that. They think so much of themselves already. And that's how it is there's old bachelors. Come, Craig, said Mr. Poyser jocosely, you mun get married pretty quick, else you'll be set down for an old bachelor. And you see what the women'll think on you. Well, said Mr. Craig, willing to conciliate Mrs. Poyser, and setting a high value on his own compliments, I like a cleverish woman, a woman of spirit, a managing woman. You're out there, Craig, said Bartle dryly. You're out there. You judge your garden stuff on a better plan than that. You pick the things for what they can excel in, You don't value your peas for their roots, or your carrots for their flowers. Now that's the way you should choose women. Their cleverness'll never come to much, but they make excellent simpletons, ripe and strong-flavoured. What dost say to that? Said Mr. Poyser, throwing himself back and looking merrily at his wife. Say, answered Mrs. Poyser, with dangerous fire kindling in her eye, why, I say as some folks' tongues are like the clocks as run on striking, not to tell you the time of day, but because there's summat wrong i' their own inside. Mrs. Poyser would probably have brought her rejoinder to a further climax if everyone's attention had not at this moment been called to the other end of the table, where the lyricism which had first only manifested itself by David's sotto voce performance of My Love's a Rose Without a Thorn had gradually assumed a rather deafening and complex character. Tim, thinking slightly of David's vocalization, was impelled to supersede that feeble buzz by a spirited commencement of Three Merry Mowers, but David was not to be put down so easily, and showed himself capable of a copious crescendo, which was rendering it doubtful whether the rose would not predominate over the mowers, when old Kester, with an entirely unmoved and immovable aspect, suddenly set up a quavering treble as if he had been an alarum, and the time was come for him to go off. The company at Alec's end of the table took this form of vocal entertainment very much as a matter of course, being free from musical prejudices, but Bartle Massey laid down his pipe and put his fingers in his ears, and Adam, who had been longing to go ever since he had heard Dinah was not in the house, rose and said he must bid good night. "I'll go with you, lad," said Bartle. "I'll go with you before my ears are split. I'll go round by the common and see you home if you like, Mr. Massey." "Aye, aye," said Bartle. "Then we can have a bit of talk together. I never get hold of you now." "It's a pity, but you'd sit it out," said Martin Poyser. "They'll all go soon, for the missus niver lets 'em stay past 10. But Adam was resolute, so the good nights were said, and the two friends turned out on their starlight walk together. "There's that poor fool Vixen, whimpering for me at home," said Bartle. "I can never bring her here with me, for fear she should be struck with Mrs. Poyser's eye, and the poor bitch might go limping for ever after." "I've never any need to drive Jip back," said Adam, laughing. "He always turns back of his own head when he finds out I'm coming here." "Aye, aye," said Bartle, "a terrible woman, made of needles. But I stick to Martin. I shall always stick to Martin, and he likes the needles, God help him. He's a cushion made on purpose for 'em. But she's a downright good-natured woman for all that, said Adam, and as true as the daylight. She's a bit cross with the dogs when they offer to come in the house, but if they depended on her, she'd take care and have 'em well fed. If her tongue's keen, her heart's tender. I've seen that in times of trouble. She's one of those women as are better than their word. Well, well, said Bartle, I don't say the apple isn't sound at the core, but it sets my teeth on edge. It sets my teeth on edge. Chapter 54. The Meeting on the Hill. Adam understood Dinah's haste to go away, and drew hope rather than discouragement from it. She was fearful lest the strength of her feeling towards him should hinder her from waiting and listening faithfully for the ultimate guiding voice from within. I wish I'd asked her to write to me, though, he thought, and yet even that might disturb her a bit, perhaps. She wants to be quite quiet in her old way for a while, and I've no right to be impatient and interrupting her with my wishes. She's told me what her mind is, and she's not a woman to say one thing and mean another. I'll wait patiently. That was Adam's wise resolution, and it throve excellently for the first 2 or 3 weeks on the nourishment it got from the remembrance of Dinah's confession that Sunday afternoon. There is a wonderful amount of sustenance in the first few words of love. But towards the middle of October, the resolution began to dwindle perceptibly, and showed dangerous symptoms of exhaustion. The weeks were unusually long. Dinah must surely have had more than enough time to make up her mind. Let a woman say what she will after she has once told a man that she loves him. He is a little too flushed and exalted with that first draught she offers him to care much about the taste of the second. He treads the earth with a very elastic step as he walks away from her and makes light of all difficulties. But that sort of glow dies out. Memory gets sadly diluted with time and is not strong enough to revive us. Adam was no longer so confident as he had been. He began to fear that perhaps Dinah's old life would have too strong a grasp upon her for any new feeling to triumph. If she had not felt this, she would surely have written to him to give him some comfort. But it appeared that she held it right to discourage him. As Adam's confidence waned, his patience waned with it, and he thought he must write himself. He must ask Dinah not to leave him in painful doubt longer than was needful. He sat up late one night to write her a letter, but the next morning he burnt it, afraid of its effect. It would be worse to have a discouraging answer by letter than from her own lips, for her presence reconciled him to her will. You perceive how it was. Adam was hungering for the sight of Dinah, and when that sort of hunger reaches a certain stage, a lover is likely to still it, though he may have to put his future in pawn. But what harm could he do by going to Snowfield? Dinah could not be displeased with him for it. She had not forbidden him to go. She must surely expect he would go before long. By the second Sunday in October, this view of the case had become so clear to Adam that he was already on his way to Snowfield, on horseback this time, for his hours were precious now, and he had borrowed Jonathan Burge's good nag for the journey. What keen memories went along the road with him! He had often been to Oakbourne and back since that first journey to Snowfield, but beyond Oakbourne, the grey stone walls, the broken country, the meagre trees, seemed to be telling him afresh the story of that painful past which he knew so well by heart. But no story is the same to us after a lapse of time, or rather we who read it are no longer the same interpreters. And Adam this morning brought with him new thoughts through that grey country, thoughts which gave an altered significance to its story of the past. That is a base and selfish, even a blasphemous spirit, which rejoices and is thankful over the past evil that has blighted or crushed another, because it has been made a source of unforeseen good to ourselves. Adam could never cease to mourn over that mystery of human sorrow which had been brought so close to him. He could never thank God for another's misery. And if I were capable of that narrow-sighted joy in Adam's behalf, I should still know he was not the man to feel it for himself. He would have shaken his head at such a sentiment and said, "Evil's evil and sorrow's sorrow, and you can't alter its nature by wrapping it up in other words. Other folks were not created for my sake, that I should think all square when things turn out well for me." But it is not ignoble to feel that the fuller life which a sad experience has brought us is worth our own personal share of pain. Surely it is not possible to feel otherwise, any more than it would be possible for a man with cataract to regret the painful process by which his dim blurred sight of men as trees walking had been exchanged for clear outline and effulgent day. The growth of higher feeling within us is like the growth of faculty, bringing with it a sense of added strength. We can no more wish to return to a narrower sympathy than a painter or a musician can wish to return to his cruder manner, or a philosopher to his less complete formula. Something like this sense of enlarged being was in Adam's mind this Sunday morning as he rode along in vivid recollection of the past. His feeling towards Dinah, the hope of passing his life with her, had been the distant, unseen point towards which that hard journey from Snowfield 18 months ago had been leading him. Tender and deep as his love for Hetty had been, so deep that the roots of it would never be torn away, his love for Dinah was better and more precious to him, for it was the outgrowth of that fuller life which had come to him from his acquaintance with deep sorrow. "It's like as if it was a new strength to me," he said to himself, "to love her and to know as she loves me. I shall look to her to help me to see things right, for she's better than I am. There's less of self in her, and pride, and it's a feeling as gives you a sort of liberty, as if you could walk more fearless when you've more trust in another than you have in yourself. I've always been thinking I knew better than them as belonged to me, and that's a poor sort of life, when you can't look to them nearest to you to help you with a bit better thought than what you've got inside you already." It was more than 2 o'clock in the afternoon when Adam came in sight of the grey town on the hillside and looked searchingly towards the green valley below, for the first glimpse of the old thatched roof near the ugly red mill. The scene looked less harsh in the soft October sunshine than it had in the eager time of early spring, and the one grand charm it possessed in common with all wide-stretching woodless regions, that it filled you with a new consciousness of the overarching sky, had a milder, more soothing influence than usual on this almost cloudless day. Adam's doubts and fears melted under this influence, as the delicate web-like clouds had gradually melted away into the clear blue above him. He seemed to see Dinah's gentle face assuring him, with its looks alone, of all he longed to know. He did not expect Dinah to be at home at this hour, but he got down from his horse and tied it at the little gate, that he might ask where she was gone today. He had set his mind on following her and bringing her home. She was gone to Sloman's End, a hamlet about 3 miles off over the hill, the old woman told him, had set off directly after morning chapel to preach in a cottage there, as her habit was. Anyone at the town would tell him the way to Sloman's End. So Adam got on his horse again and rode to the town, putting up at the old inn and taking a hasty dinner there in the company of the too chatty landlord, from whose friendly questions and reminiscences he was glad to escape as soon as possible, and set out towards Sloman's End. With all his haste, it was nearly 4 o'clock before he could set off, and he thought that as Dinah had gone so early, she would perhaps already be near returning. The little grey, desolate-looking hamlet, unscreened by sheltering trees, lay in sight long before he reached it, and as he came near he could hear the sound of voices singing a hymn. Perhaps that's the last hymn before they come away, Adam thought. I'll walk back a bit and turn again to meet her farther off the village. He walked back till he got nearly to the top of the hill again, and seated himself on a loose stone against the low wall to watch till he could see the little black figure leaving the hamlet and winding up the hill. He chose this spot almost at the top of the hill because it was away from all eyes. No house, no cattle, not even a nibbling sheep near. No presence but the still lights and shadows and the great embracing sky. She was much longer coming than he expected. He waited an hour at least, watching for her and thinking of her, while the afternoon shadows lengthened and the light grew softer. At last he saw the little black figure coming from between the grey houses and gradually approaching the foot of the hill. Slowly, Adam thought, but Dinah was really walking at her usual pace, with a light, quiet step. Now she was beginning to wind along the path up the hill, but Adam would not move yet. He would not meet her too soon. He had set his heart on meeting her in this assured loneliness. And now he began to fear lest he should startle her too much. Yet, he thought, she's not one to be over-startled. She's always so calm and quiet, as if she was prepared for anything. What was she thinking of as she wound up the hill? Perhaps she had found complete repose without him, and had ceased to feel any need of his love. On the verge of a decision we all tremble. Hope pauses with fluttering wings. But now, at last, she was very near, and Adam rose from the stone wall. It happened that just as he walked forward, Dinah had paused and turned round to look back at the village. Who does not pause and look back in mounting a hill? Adam was glad, for with the fine instinct of a lover, he felt that it would be best for her to hear his voice before she saw him. He came within 3 paces of her, and then said, "Dinah." She started without looking round, as if she connected the sound with no place. "Dinah," Adam said again. He knew quite well what was in her mind. She was so accustomed to think of impressions as purely spiritual monitions that she looked for no material, visible accompaniment of the voice. But this second time she looked round. What a look Of yearning love it was that the mild grey eyes turned on the strong, dark-eyed man. She did not start again at the sight of him. She said nothing, but moved towards him so that his arm could clasp her round. And they walked on so in silence while the warm tears fell. Adam was content and said nothing. It was Dinah who spoke first. "Adam," she said, "it is the divine will. My soul is so knit to yours that it is but a divided life I live without you. And at this moment, now you are with me, and I feel that our hearts are filled with the same love, I have a fullness of strength to bear and do our Heavenly Father's will that I had lost before." Adam paused and looked into her sincere, loving eyes. "Then we'll never part any more, Dinah, till death parts us." And they kissed each other with a deep joy. What greater joy is there for two human souls than to feel they are joined for life, to strengthen each other in all labour, to rest on each other in all sorrow, to minister to each other in all pain, to be one with each other in silent, unspeakable memories at the moment of the last parting? Chapter 55. Marriage Bells. In little more than a month after that meeting on the hill, on a rimy morning in departing November, Adam and Dinah were married. It was an event much thought of in the village. All Mr. Burge's men had a holiday, and all Mr. Poyser's, and most of those who had a holiday appeared in their best clothes at the wedding. I think there was hardly an inhabitant of Hazelop specially mentioned in this history, and still resident in the parish on this November morning, who was not either in church to see Adam and Dinah married, or near the church door to greet them as they came forth. Mrs. Irwine and her daughters were waiting at the churchyard gates in their carriage, for they have a carriage now, to shake hands with the bride and groom and wish them well. And in the absence of Miss Lydia Donnithorne at Bath, Mrs. Best, Mr. Mills, and Mr. Craig had felt it incumbent on them to represent the family at the Chase on the occasion. The churchyard walk was quite lined with familiar faces, many of them faces that had first looked at Dinah when she preached on the green. And no wonder they showed this eager interest on her marriage morning, for nothing like Dinah and the history which had brought her and Adam Bede together had been known at Hazelop within the memory of man. Bessie Cranage, with her neatest cap and frock, was crying, though she did not exactly know why. For, as her cousin Wiry Ben, who stood near her, judiciously suggested, Dinah was not going away, and if Bessie was in low spirits, the best thing for her to do was to follow Dinah's example and marry an honest fellow who was ready to have her. Next to Bessie, just within the church door, there were the Poyser children, peeping round the corner of the pews to get a sight of the mysterious ceremony. Totty's face wearing an unusual air of anxiety at the idea of seeing Cousin Dinah come back looking rather old, for in Totty's experience no married people were young. I envy them all the sight they had when the marriage was fairly ended, and Adam led Dinah out of church. She was not in black this morning, for her Aunt Poyser would by no means allow such a risk of incurring bad luck, and had herself made a present of the wedding dress, made all of grey, though in the usual Quaker form, for on this point Dinah could not give way. So the lily face looked out with sweet gravity from under a grey Quaker bonnet, neither smiling nor blushing, but with lips trembling a little under the weight of solemn feelings. Adam, as he pressed her arm to his side, walked with his old erectness, and his head thrown rather backward as if to face all the world better. But it was not because he was particularly proud this morning, as is the wont of bridegrooms, for his happiness was of a kind that had little reference to men's opinion of it. There was a tinge of sadness in his deep joy. Dinah knew it, and did not feel aggrieved. There were 3 other couples following the bride and bridegroom. First, Martin Poyser, looking as cheery as a bright fire on this rimy morning, led quiet Mary Burge, the bridesmaid. Then came Seth, serenely happy, with Mrs. Poyser on his arm. And last of all, Bartle Massey, with Lisbeth. Lisbeth in a new gown and bonnet, too busy with her pride in her son and her delight in possessing the one daughter she had desired to devise a single pretext for complaint. Bartle Massey had consented to attend the wedding at Adam's earnest request, under protest against marriage in general, and the marriage of a sensible man in particular. Nevertheless, Mr. Poyser had a joke against him after the wedding dinner, to the effect that in the vestry he had given the bride one more kiss than was necessary. Behind this last couple came Mr. Irwine, glad at heart over this good morning's work of joining Adam and Dinah. For he had seen Adam in the worst moments of his sorrow, and what better harvest from that painful seed-time could there be than this? The love that had brought hope and comfort in the hour of despair, the love that had found its way to the dark prison cell and to poor Hetty's darker soul. This strong, gentle love was to be Adam's companion and helper till death. There was much shaking of hands, mingled with "God bless yous" and other good wishes to the 4 couples at the churchyard gate, Mr. Poyser answering for the rest with unwonted vivacity of tongue, for he had all the appropriate wedding-day jokes at his command. And the women, he observed, could never do anything but put finger in eye at a wedding. Even Mrs. Poyser could not trust herself to speak, as the neighbours shook hands with her, and Lisbeth began to cry in the face of the very first person who told her she was getting young again. Mr. Joshua Rann, having a slight touch of rheumatism, did not join in the ringing of bells this morning, and looking on with some contempt at these informal greetings which required no official cooperation from the clerk, began to hum in his musical bass, "Oh, what a joyful thing it is," by way of preluding a little to the effect he intended to produce in the wedding psalm next Sunday. "That's a bit of good news to cheer Arthur," said Mr. Irwine to his mother as they drove off. "I shall write to him the first thing when we get home." Epilogue. It is near the end of June in 1807. The workshops have been shut up half an hour or more in Adam Bede's timber yard, which used to be Jonathan Burge's, and the mellow evening light is falling on the pleasant house with the buff walls and the soft grey thatch, very much as it did when we saw Adam bringing in the keys on that June evening 9 years ago. There is a figure we know well just come out of the house, and shading her eyes with her hands as she looks for something in the distance, for the rays that fall on her white borderless cap and her pale auburn hair are very dazzling. But now she turns away from the sunlight and looks towards the door. We can see the sweet, pale face quite well now. It is scarcely at all altered, only a little fuller to correspond to her more matronly figure, which still seems light and active enough in the plain black dress. "I see him, Seth," Dinah said as she looked into the house. "Let us go and meet him. Come, Lisbeth, come with mother." The last call was answered immediately by a small, fair creature with pale auburn hair and grey eyes, little more than 4 years old, who ran out silently and put her hand into her mother's. "Come, Uncle Seth," said Dinah. "Aye, aye, we're coming," Seth answered from within, and presently appeared stooping under the doorway, being taller than usual by the black head of a sturdy 2-year-old nephew, who had caused some delay by demanding to be carried on Uncle's shoulder. "Better take him on thy arm, Seth," said Dinah, looking fondly at the stout, black-eyed fellow. "He's troublesome to thee so." "Nay, nay, Addy likes a ride on my shoulder. I can carry him so for a bit." A kindness which young Addy acknowledged by drumming his heels with promising force against Uncle Seth's chest. But to walk by Dinah's side and be tyrannized over by Dinah's and Adam's children was Uncle Seth's earthly happiness. "Where didst see him?" asked Seth as they walked on into the adjoining field. "I can't catch sight of him anywhere." "Between the hedges by the roadside," said Dinah. "I saw his hat and his shoulder. There he is again." "Trust thee for catching sight of him if he's anywhere to be seen," said Seth, smiling. "Thee't like poor mother used to be. She was always on the lookout for Adam, and could see him sooner than other folks, for all her eyes got dim." "He's been longer than he expected," said Dinah, taking Arthur's watch from a small side pocket and looking at it. "It's nigh upon 7 now." "Aye, they'd have a deal to say to one another," said Seth, "and the meeting 'ud touch 'em both pretty close-ish. Why, it's getting on towards 8 years since they parted." "Yes," said Dinah. "Adam was greatly moved this morning at the thought of the change he should see in the poor young man, from the sickness he has undergone, as well as the years which have changed us all. And the death of the poor wanderer, when she was coming back to us, has been sorrow upon sorrow." "See, Addy," said Seth, lowering the young one to his arm now and pointing, "there's father coming at the far stile." Dinah hastened her steps, and little Lisbeth ran on at her utmost speed till she clasped her father's leg. Adam patted her head and lifted her up to kiss her, but Dinah could see the marks of agitation on his face as she approached him, and he put her arm within his in silence. "Well, youngster, must I take you?" he said, trying to smile, when Addy stretched out his arms, ready with the usual baseness of infancy to give up his Uncle Seth at once, now there was some rarer patronage at hand. "It's cut me a good deal, Dinah," Adam said at last, when they were walking on. "Didst find him greatly altered?" said Dinah. "Why, he's altered and yet not altered. I should have known him anywhere, but his colour's changed, and he looks sadly. However, the doctors say he'll soon be set right in his own country air. He's all sound in the inside. It's only the fever shattered him so, but he speaks just the same, and smiles at me just as he did when he was a lad. It's wonderful how he's always had just the same sort of look when he smiles." "I've never seen him smile, poor young man," said Dinah. "But thee wilt see him smile tomorrow," said Adam. "He asked after thee the first thing when he began to come round, and we could talk to one another. 'I hope she isn't altered,' he said. 'I remember her face so well.' I told him no, Adam continued, looking fondly at the eyes that were turned towards his. Only a bit plumper as thee'd's the right to be after 7 year. I may come and see her tomorrow, mayn't I? He said. I long to tell her how I've thought of her all these years.
Didst tell him I'd always used the watch? Said Dinah.
Aye, and we talked a deal about thee, for he says he never saw a woman a bit like thee. I shall turn Methodist some day, he said, when she preaches out of doors, and go to hear her. And I said, Nay, sir, you can't do that, for conference has forbid the women preaching, and she's given it up, all but talking to the people a bit in their houses.
Ah, said Seth, who could not repress a comment on this point, and a sore pity it was a conference, and if Dinah had seen as I did, we'd a left the Wesleyans and joined a body that had put no bonds on Christian liberty.
Nay, lad, nay, said Adam, she was right and thee wast wrong. There's no rule so wise but what it's a pity for somebody or other. Most of the women do more harm nor good with their preaching. They've not got Dinah's gift nor her spirit, and she's seen that, and she thought it right to set the example of submitting, for she's not held from other sorts of teaching, and I agree with her and approve of what she did.
Seth was silent. This was a standing subject of difference, rarely alluded to, and Dinah, wishing to quit it at once, said, Didst remember, Adam, to speak to Colonel Donnithorne the words my uncle and aunt entrusted to thee?
Yes, and he's going to the Hall Farm with Mr. Irwine the day after tomorrow. Mr. Irwine came in while we were talking about it, and he would have it as the Colonel must see nobody but thee tomorrow. He said, and he's in the right of it, as it'll be bad for him to have his feelings stirred with seeing many people, one after another. We must get you strong and hearty, he said. That's the first thing to be done, Arthur, and then you shall have your own way. But I shall keep you under your old tutor's thumb till then. Mr. Irwine's fine and joyful at having him home again.
Adam was silent a little while, and then said, It was very cutting when we first saw one another. He'd never heard about poor Hetty till Mr. Irwine met him in London, for the letters missed him on his journey. The first thing he said to me, when we'd got hold of one another's hands, was, I could never do anything for her, Adam. She lived long enough for all the suffering, and I'd thought so of the time when I might do something for her. But you told me the truth when you said to me once, There's a sort of wrong that can never be made up for.
Why, there's Mr. and Mrs. Poyser coming in at the yard gate, said Seth.
So there is, said Dinah. Run, Lisbeth, run to meet Aunt Poyser. Come in, Adam, and rest. It has been a hard day for thee. End of Adam Bede by George Eliot.